This is the Zoom Platform Podcast.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third Zoom Platform Podcast. Last time we talked about the fifth generation of video game consoles, so we figured we'd keep on that historical tangent and talk this time about the sixth generation. There was a bit of discussion before about how the Sega Dreamcast, while technically coming out in the middle of the fifth generation, was really more part of the sixth generation. We also now have the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and the Xbox entering the fold. We'll also visit the handhelds like the Game Boy Advance and Neo Geo Pocket Color. Joining me as always are our fantastic co-hosts, Cameron Stark and Max Petrosky.
Hey.
Greetings.
So, gentlemen, why don't we get started? I guess let's start with the Dreamcast.
That sounds good. Yeah, the Dreamcast was always a really fun console. I remember seeing the first time I saw a Dreamcast was in those kiosks in like a JC Penney, or it was a really weird department store, like the last place you would see a game console kiosk, and it had Sonic Adventure on there, and you could really tell, like, graphically it was a whole nother level, because like it had Sonic Adventure on there, and I just remember it's like one of the sky levels where you're just in a skybox and you're running around going up vertically and stuff, and I just remember my jaw on the floor. Graphics wise, my mind was just blown.
Well, that NEC Power VR chip was just incredible for the time, just leaps and bounds ahead of what was already considered great, like the N64 and the PlayStation 1.
Absolutely, yeah, and I remember like Crazy Taxi too, like also just being insane. Like whenever you would do, my favorite part when you would go down the hill, the sparks would fly off of the carriage. The undercarriage of the vehicle, and it's just that type of particle graphics, that type of stuff was like I never saw that before in a video game. I was like, this is the latest and greatest, And
and aside from arcade machines and PCs, we hadn't seen 60 frames per second. Like we hadn't seen games run that fast. Like on console gamers hadn't anyway.
Right, and it felt natural too, like even before, like, because I was only like, I was only 8 years old when almost 9 when the Dreamcast came out, so it was very,
which was $99.99 for $199.
Yeah, and 99 cents.
Yeah, exactly. I forgot about that.
But yeah, no, it was really fascinating because, like, even back then, before I knew terminology like frames per second and stuff, that 60 frames per second felt natural. Felt, like you could already tell this was as awesome as the N64 was. You could already tell this was getting leaps and bounds ahead. Graphically anyway, and so it was really it's always been a console near and dear to my heart, because it just did everything right in terms of hardware.
Absolutely, and technically it supported VGA out of the box, and a lot of people think Xbox Live is the first online service, but really technically there were some things with the Saturn and even the Nintendo 64 disk drive in Japan, but the first truly worldwide online game networks were SegaNet and Dream Arena for the Dreamcast, mainly for Quake 3 Arena, Unreal Tournament, and actually the NFL 2K series, which had online play before Madden. And what's interesting, too, about the 2K series, Bernie helped put that together. Bernie Stolar, chairman of our company. 2K Sports started off with Sega. You most likely know it now for the NBA 2K series, MLB 2K series, through Take-Two Interactive. But that's really more of a coincidence that they got acquired by Take-Two, because they were called 2K via Visual Concepts with Sega. And because EA refused to support the Dreamcast due to how the Saturn had done commercially, Bernie had to come up with a way to compete, and 2K was so competitive that EA decided to pick up the NFL license exclusively in 06, and that's why you don't see any NFL 2K games anymore. A lot of people like those better, and the fact that they'd only charge $20 a year for a roster update as opposed to EA, that really gave them a run for their money. So they decided to just lock it up, and that way there wouldn't be any more NFL 2K games. There was that one All-Pro football, which I think had like Johnny Unitas, different. I'm not a big football guy, so I don't know all the names, but Joe Montana had different legends that you could play with, but that just never took off, unfortunately. So that's why I haven't really seen one since.
That's really fascinating. I didn't know that because I remember I don't play much sports games, but I do remember playing a lot of NFL Blitz on the Dreamcast.
There's another one, yeah.
Yeah, and I just always like the fact that after the play, you could still tackle the
yeah. No, I love that too.
Or run into the goalpost and just bounce off it. That was always funny.
Oh, what was the game? There's NFL Extreme 2 is the game I'm thinking of, not Blitz. Although it might have been by the same people. Is it Midway, right?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah, Blitz was Midway, yeah.
Blitz was Midway. I'm not sure about Extreme.
Oh, okay. Well, Extreme was 989, I think. 989 Studios.
Ah, that's Sony, okay.
Yeah, I remember that game you could also do that. Like, it was like... after certain plays, like if a player made like a really good play, they would show the sideline view, and like the guy would come to the camera and he'd be like, "Yeah, in your face," or he'd like make some quip or something, and then you could still like run around in the background as your character. And so I would always like try to like navigate my character onto the camera, and you'd see him like running around behind, and then like I'd just tackle the guy, and it would actually cut off his voice line. If you tackled him, and he'd be like, "Oh," he'd like fall over.
One of the other reasons why I really like Sega is I saw them more as a entrepreneur's company as opposed to kind of the corporate outlook, which we're seeing more and more. Which, in a way, kind of started with this generation with Microsoft coming in and Sony, really. Establishing themselves with the PS2. Obviously, the PS1 was a huge success, but the PS2 is just unparalleled. But what I liked about the Dreamcast was they're always willing to take chances and risks. You had games like Space Channel 5, Samba de Amigo, and all these different add-ons like the light guns. They had the Dream Eye before the iToy, before the Kinect and all that. They had the fishing rod for Sega Bass Fishing and Sega Marine Fishing. You had the Dreamcast mouse and keyboard, the microphone for Seaman, and of course, we can't forget the visual memory unit, the VMU. I mean, just a lot of unique stuff that came out of Sega. They were willing to take those risks, and try something unique.
Yeah, with the hardware, especially from that perspective.
No, absolutely, and I think gameplay too. Like I said, like Space Channel 5. I mean, at least me, who would have thought that would have worked?
Yeah.
It is a very weird concept, but it works. It's surprisingly surprisingly cool. And the only problem I have with the Dreamcast, and this is more of like a problem as I've gotten older rather than something I've noticed. I always get hand fatigue with the controller just because it's sort of like it's a very narrow like controller for me.
Yeah, your hands do kind of get crunched in there.
Yeah, so and it's a shame because I really like the design of the controller too. It's one I think aesthetically it's the whole console in general is a very beautiful console.
Oh yeah,
and white's very difficult to pull off, and with the Wii, even though I give respect to the Wii and stuff. it just doesn't. It looks like a cheap, toy. But the
Xbox 360 did a good job with it, but I know what you mean. Dreamcast. Dreamcast almost looks like Apple made it. It's got that simplicity.
Yeah.
The simplicity. It's just it just works. It's a simple little box.
The plastic
works.
feels more expensive too. Like it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the design of the console too. It looks expensive or something. I don't know, but.
But it's definitely I think the flat finish, the semi-gloss flat finish.
Yeah, it has kind of a soft look to it.
Yeah, it's not glossy like the Wii, and that really it displays better. It looks better. It's assembled better.
And it's interesting too that a lot of consoles up until the PS2 actually was the first one didn't have a lot of sharp angles.
Yeah,
and the Dreamcast included had like softer angles on it, whereas like PS2 and on up, and maybe I guess the original Xbox was kind of softer, but the PS2 had very sharp edges. You could stub your toe on that and it would hurt.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
The Wii had really sharp edges. The GameCube also had soft edges.
Yeah. Even the GameCube itself is, even though it's an angular console, it still has beveled edges and stuff, or at least rounded edges. But you look at the Dreamcast from a profile, side view, and it's surprisingly wavy. It's got a very curvy side view. Actually, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I should bring up two other things, too, that we should hit on with the Dreamcast before we move on to the next console. Obviously, it had the uniqueness as well of the 1.2 gigabyte GD-ROMs, as opposed to CDs or DVDs.
Oh, yeah.
I remember from talking with Bernie, he really wanted a DVD player in there as well as the online capability. In fact, he pushed very hard for the online capability. Sega of Japan didn't want to do it. He also wanted the DVD player, but it really just came down to the economics. Sega had lost nearly, I believe, just under $260 million with the Saturn, and they just couldn't afford to put the DVD player in. That they were going to hopefully try to add that on with essentially an add-on later on, but unfortunately it just wasn't in the cards. Bernie was also negotiating too very early on to get games like Max Payne, Half-Life, and even World of Warcraft and Grand Theft Auto 3 as temporary exclusives or with unique features exclusive to the Dreamcast. Yeah, he was actually talking to those guys.
That would have been huge.
And what made it possible, actually, was Sega had made a deal with Microsoft because, as you probably notice on the bottom right corner of the console when you're looking at it, it supports not only the internal Sega OS for programmers, but also Windows Custom Edition, which is essentially Windows 2000 NT that programmers could write for because it would be easier. It'd be a snap as opposed to programming for the Saturn, which was just an unbelievable chore for developers. I mean, that's what Bernie and they did. They looked at the Saturn and they said, okay. And the Saturn's a great console. There's some great games on it. It's a fantastic machine. It was too difficult to program for, and there were issues in getting the software, making it popular in the U.S. because it just unfortunately didn't sell as it should in the U.S. It did fine in Japan, just not here. But Sega and Bernie, they went, okay, how can we reestablish Sega, reestablish the brand? And they did everything right. It just, unfortunately, PS2 is just such a juggernaut, and with the DVD player, it just, unfortunately, there just wasn't really a chance. And apparently there wasn't a chance for anyone else either, because if you look at the sales units, PS2 sold 155 million. The second one is Xbox with 24 million, then GameCube with 22, and then the Dreamcast 9.13. Nobody even comes close to them. Even if you add up Xbox, GameCube, and Dreamcast, you're still nowhere near the PS2.
I know that in Japan especially, I remember from watching a video, I know in Japan especially, not having a DVD player, they contributed to a lack of sales. I don't know that it would have made a difference, but it does make me wonder how much of a difference it would have made had the Dreamcast had a DVD player. If it would have helped them stay afloat longer. Or potentially through the whole generation.
You're absolutely right. And the other thing I wonder about too is having a dual joystick controller, because that was the other thing. It was very hard to control first-person shooters, at least for me.
Yeah.
Unreal Tournament had a unique setting that worked right, where basically, if I remember right, you kind of aimed with the face buttons and you ran with the stick. But, I mean...
That's similar to how PSP games worked.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like that, but just when you're also playing against people, who had the Dreamcast mouse and keyboard, you just had no chance.
Yeah.
Well, and the Dreamcast controller, I mean, I'm in agreement with you guys. I love the Dreamcast controller. I love the design of it, but unfortunately, the analog stick, at least Dreamcast controllers I've used, maybe ones I've used were just punished more than others, but the analog stick didn't seem to hold up very well. It got pretty wobbly. Pretty quick. It was pretty flimsy.
Seems like the N64 then, in that sense.
Yeah.
It's better than the N64, but not by much. I know, like, sometimes it'll, like, spin on its axis.
Yeah.
And it's really... and sometimes the spring can get loose and stuff, so you'll have a bit of a dead zone going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're it's... One pro though with the controller though that I do like, and I forgot about, but and we should, it's something I think to more game companies should go back to, is that there's almost like a braille system going on with the buttons, because I forgot that like
the bumps.
There's these the little bumps on the buttons, and that's something that's really convenient, especially the fact that the buttons are all the same size, and if you're ever in a situation where you're like, you forgot what button you're hitting, and you don't have time to look down at your controller and then quickly. I mean, it's kind of a minute thing, but I do like that aspect.
No, but it's those kind of nuances that that make it what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And before we go to, I think next we'll go to the PlayStation 2. We'll go in chronological order. I just wanted to kind of do a roundtable with you guys here. Max, you touched on earlier Sonic Adventure, the first one. That's actually the Dreamcast best-selling game, selling 2.5 million units. Considering that, is that your favorite Dreamcast game? And if not, what is your favorite Dreamcast game, guys?
Ooh. Okay. I've again, the software for the Dreamcast was phenomenal. There's so many great titles. I remember playing. I'm gonna butcher up the name, but it's either Metropolis or Metropolitan Street Racer.
I think it's Metropolis. I think MSR, Metropolis Street Racer.
Yeah, it's the predecessor to Project Gotham Racing.
Right.
And I remember playing the crap out of that game, and that was a lot of fun. I loved Crazy Taxi. Crazy Taxi is is a great game. And I'm trying to remember what else. I remember my least favorite game was Coaster Works, with the scream simulating dummy that would ride with you on the roller coaster, and it just, the sound effects, oh my god, and like the 5-second music loop. It had a nice idea, but
well, there was a PC game that was made by Bullfrog, who had done the theme park adventure from back in the day. I think it was in '99 as well, called Sim Theme Park, which, if anyone's interested, I think is probably the penultimate theme park simulator. It got the economics right, how to run the business, how to design the rides without being too complicated. For me, Sim Theme Park was just a brilliant execution of that formula. But in terms of the Dreamcast, you guys hit a lot of the titles I love. I wanted to throw in as well Sonic Adventure 2. I probably played Sonic Adventure 2 more, the battle version on the GameCube, but I just love that city escape level. I mean, to me, that's the Dreamcast right there.
Yeah.
Another game, it's technically multi-platform, but it's one of my favorite games of all time. It was on the N64 and the Dreamcast, San Francisco Rush 2049. The battle mode to me of that is just multiplayer, the penultimate multiplayer mode for arcade battle racing. But Spider-Man's another great example. Again, multi-platform, but it was great on both N64, PS1, Dreamcast. It was actually on all of them. I didn't realize that. But those are some great titles there. In terms of exclusives, you guys touched on Crazy Taxi. I think we may have mentioned before too. Obviously, The Simpsons Road Rage, another mutual favorite. There's a little lawsuit there that was just crazy.
Was that on Dreamcast?
No,
no, that was on GameCube, Xbox, and PS2.
Oh.
But Sega.
You're talking about Crazy Taxi
with
right.
EA. Yeah,
right.
yeah. Well, no, Crazy Taxi was on all four. I think technically.
Yeah.
They
Yes.
it.
Right.
But yeah, Simpsons. Yeah, there's a bit of a lawsuit. They're basically saying the Simpsons Road Rage was Crazy Taxi with Simpsons characters, which it was. But I don't know if a lawsuit was necessary. But I digress.
Yeah. Also exclusives. There's Shenmue. It's one of the biggest RPGs on Dreamcast.
One of the first open world games too. Predating Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah. And
Jet
then
Set
also,
Radio.
Jet Set Radio.
All the cell shading with Jets. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. And then also a little niche title that I've actually found out about through Max's brother Chris is Power Stone.
Yeah, Power Stone.
I remember Power Stone 2 as well. Both of those were great.
Yeah, that was essentially
it
was like a beat 'em up, right? It was sort of like Smash Brothers, and it had these really cool dynamic levels that would like evolve over time. It was cool.
And what was neat was you're right.
Yeah, I'm good.
Oh, what was neat too was Capcom made that, and they also made Heavy Metal Geomatrix, which had a lot of great music, and was another great fighting game by them. Spawn and the Demon's Hand, based on the Spawn license. Those were two great, more of those kind of fighting games. There, you could fight, you could shoot. It was pretty neat. Trying to think of some other titles.
Street Fighter 3, Third Strike.
Soul Calibur.
Soul Calibur, of course.
Yeah, Soul Calibur. Yeah.
There's a lot of really good, like you mentioned, Power Stone. There's a lot of really good fighting games on the Dreamcast.
We were talking too about I have a soft spot for cartoon titles, but the cell shading. I love Looney Tunes Space Race growing up, Wacky Races, and I think Max, you like that. There was a Disney racer or something you were talking about the other day.
Yeah. And I keep on forgetting. It's Magical Kingdom Racer or something like that. That was an interesting title. But I remember two other games too. That one I still need to try out, but I think the three of us equally praise it is Rez. And also I played this on the PC, but it's also for PlayStation and Dreamcast. Rayman 2: Great Escape.
Oh yes, there's a fantastic. Cam, you play that one?
No, I haven't played any of the Rayman games.
Really?
I need to.
Oh wow, we need to lock him in a room with him.
Yeah, yeah. Rayman 2 is a phenomenal game. Great music, great gameplay mechanics. Definitely like one of the best platformers ever,
and I think the Dreamcast probably is the best version of it. The Rayman 2: The Great Escape. I remember the PS2 one had some interesting quirks. The N64 one was close, but if I remember right, I think the Dreamcast is the best version of that. Kind of like Rayman, the original, the best version's on PS1.
Well, that's another interesting thing about the Dreamcast, too, is that it had these multi-platform games on it that, obviously, the PS2 took that sort of a step further, where games were either like remastered or ported to PS2 and they looked better, etc., played better, and etc. But the Dreamcast was the first one that took those PC and PlayStation 1 games and made them look better. They played smoother, etc. You had like Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Power Battles, one of my favorite Star Wars games.
Episode 1 Racer, too.
Episode 1 Racer, that's right. Resident Evil 2 and 3, or at least 3. I think also 2. Oh, and Code Veronica.
And then technically, let's not forget Bleemcast. It made Metal Gear Solid look even better on the Dreamcast.
And Gran Turismo.
and Tekken 2.
Yeah, that's right. Or was it Tekken 3 that I thought they got?
Oh, man.
Might have been both. Who knows?
Yeah. But I remember, that was really fascinating playing the Tekken game on there, and the graphics, like, it used the anti-aliasing and stuff to smooth out the textures and stuff. Like, that was... Yeah, Dreamcast was ahead of its time.
Yeah, really. And
way ahead. And they were pretty smart the way they handled it on a legal basis too. And I think eventually Sony hired the guy who created it, which they should have done in the first place, frankly.
Yeah.
I know Nintendo did that. I think with the guy that did one of the earliest NES emulators, that they end up firing him and using his code for the NES emulators that are on Animal Crossing. And
well, that's. I was going to say that's how they got Rare too. Rare was reverse engineering NES games, and they basically said to the brothers there, "Hey, why don't you come work for us?" That's how Rare became a company, basically.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So okay, so I guess we're on to the PS2 now.
Yeah. We'll go on to the PS2. We'll hit all the consoles, and then we'll kind of. I figured we'd talk the Stamper Brothers. By the way, that's what the name I was trying to think of there, with Rare. But yeah, I figured we'd hit all the consoles, and then we'd kind of just talk about kind of the defining titles. You know, we'd go through again kind of our favorite titles from the generation, just kind of an all around kind of discussion,
and also talk about I guess also talk about memories and stuff too, online play, multiplayer. Gaming moments, stuff like that too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We got a long way to go. So yeah, PS2, gentlemen, what do you think?
It sucked. No.
Probably my personal favorite console of all time.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting choice.
I mean, it's the console that I grew up with probably the longest. Besides maybe the 360, I'm sure I have the most games for it. Although, well, I might have PS1 the most, but I do know I have a really big PS2 collection. Yeah, I don't know. I got it pretty shortly after launch. I remember opening it up Christmas morning 2000, and before I got the PS2, I remember getting Blockbuster used to rent consoles briefly, I think, and it was pretty expensive. But I remember when Blockbuster got in the PS2 shortly after it came out. I remember I was so excited, and because I knew eventually I would own it, but I was like begging my dad, like, please, we gotta rent it. And I remember one day he came home from work carrying this big black box, this big plastic box, and it had the PS2 in it, rented from Blockbuster, and he had a copy of Midnight Club Street Racing. And that was the first PS2 game I ever played, was Midnight Club Street Racing. Yeah.
That's funny.
And to touch on the case, it looked like a big black plastic suitcase, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they had that at Hollywood Video as well. I remember with the Dreamcast, you could take. It was a few months before the Dreamcast even came out. They had a limited edition of Sonic Adventure. You could take it home. I remember seeing a similar suitcase kind of thing.
Huh.
That's funny.
But yeah, I remember when I started it up and like playing it, like I was just in awe, like at the graphics and just the console itself. Like I was in heaven when we had that thing.
Midnight Club Racing, man. That's definitely a cool title to start with.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why that's so funny to me is that Midnight Club is very similar to one of my all-time favorite racing games, and my first PC, my first Windows PC racing game, Midtown Madness. It's the same developer, Angel Studios, which became Rockstar San Diego, and I think Midnight Club runs on a PS2 version, slightly better version of the Midtown Madness engine. So they're very similar games. So that's really fast. I didn't know that was your first game. That's funny.
Yeah. Well, and also I think simultaneously, I think he actually rented two games with it, because I also remember Smuggler's Run. I played also.
That's also.
Oh yeah, right.
Two title.
Yeah. I didn't like Smuggler's Run as much, though, as Midnight Club.
Well, speaking of Take-Two, the top-selling game on the PlayStation 2 was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas with 20.81 million units.
Wow.
Jeez.
So, and that was unbelievable. I mean, the start for me, that's my favorite era of the GTA game, because that's how I first heard "Welcome to the Jungle." It was in one of the commercials, and I just was like, "Whoa!" Because I had always loved like blues-inspired rock, and this was I think I was 12 when it came out, and I was get almost a teenager, and I needed a song that showed like, yeah, I'm pissed off at the world, and that was it.
For me, PlayStation 2. Growing up, my parents were anti-video game for the longest time, so I didn't actually own a PlayStation 2 throughout its lifespan, and I technically still don't. My brother has one, so he's more familiar with the game library and stuff. But a lot of games, did eventually get ported to the GameCube and stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, no, I'm the wild card here in this situation, in that I never actually got to experience the PlayStation 2 as an owner during the lifespan, which I find it's really I'm in a minority of gamers with that, so that's always been fascinating.
Well, I should mention, too, I technically only got the PS2 in its last year of existence, really, 2005, and the Dreamcast I got a few years after it got discontinued, so I got late into it as well. It's funny you said your parents were kind of anti-video game. My parents were similar, and they kind of told me, look, you have it's funny, this was the argument that, you have a PC and it can do so much more. It was the argument that you hear today from PC gamers. You don't need to do that. Just play on your family PC and, focus on that. But I just kept wanting, and so eventually I saved up. I think it was 1999, which would have been when I was 7. I got a Game Boy Color at the end of the third quarter of school, and then when it came time for summer, I'd saved up enough and finally got a Nintendo 64. If you can believe that, in June of 1999, I finally tried it out. But in any case, I can obviously relate. And I wanted to touch on one other thing, too, with San Andreas. I was talking about Welcome to the Jungle. Some people may not know this. Axl Rose is actually one of the DJs on the KDST, the Dust station, or he is the DJ. And there were some other great things on that as well, because that was around the time when Velvet Revolver came out, and I was a fan of them, being a Guns N' Roses fan as well, and I was like, wow, there's a song in here, this Plush song that sounds like the Velvet Revolver guy, and that's how I figured out, oh, that's Stone Temple Pilots. And I mean, it was just really cool because they really captured the era. And I guess one of my favorite things was there on one of the talk channels, there was this Gardening with Maurice, which was Andy Dick from News Radio, and just I love that game.
Right,
so all that cool stuff.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I don't remember listening to the radio as much in San Andreas, which is unfortunate now that you're telling me about all these songs, because I didn't really think about it back then when I was playing it. But I did listen to the radio a lot in Vice City. I really liked the 80s music in that. And I remember there was a funny talk show in Vice City that was like, it had like some Viking guy on it or something. I can't remember now. I just remember that was really funny.
Well, yeah, I mean, they always had great guest stars, and like you said, they had great 80s music in Vice City, always great song selection. I remember that KDST channel, they had Billy Idol, they had David Bowie, I think it was Somebody Up There Likes Me. They had Joe Cocker. I'm trying to think who else they had. They had Heart. I mean, they really great song selection.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the GTA games from that era didn't age very well. And especially when you look at games today, like, especially you look at San Andreas, you look at the map for that and compare it in size to the map of GTA 5, which the GTA 5 map is just one city from PS2 San Andreas, and it's like, I don't even know how many times bigger. It's like at least 5 times bigger than 10 times bigger than the entire map of San Andreas in that game.
True, but I just love how chaotic. I mean, it still gets chaotic today, obviously, but it was almost like watching a live-action cartoon,
Yeah.
When you played like a game like San Andreas. The other sad thing, too, is, now that the games are getting older, you can still play them on Steam, which is great, but some of the music licensing has run out, so it's been removed. So to really get the original experience, you got to go find like the old Xbox copy, which I think is probably the best version, the Xbox ports.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, because the graphics were cleaned up, and they definitely looked better. I mean, you could get, I guess if you didn't have access to an Xbox, you could get like an old version of the PC versions, but that still has the music.
Exactly. The other thing I think we should touch on as well is obviously the PlayStation 2 had that expandable hard drive bay, which I think was mainly used for Final Fantasy, the network adapter for online play. Did you use any of those, Cameron? I mean, you are the biggest PS2 fan of us here.
I had a network adapter, and then I also had later got the small PS2 that had it built in. Another title that used the HDD was Resident Evil Outbreak, one of my favorite games on PS2. And it used it to great effect for the loading screens, because obviously Resident Evil is known for the famous door loading screens. And usually those are like, in most of the Resident Evil games, the door loading screens are 7 seconds. But in Outbreak, without the hard drive, just loading from the disk, and I guess it was because the environments were fully 3D rendered. I don't know exactly the reasoning, but for whatever reason, the loading screens between doors were usually like, they could be upwards of 20 seconds or more. And you just hear this heartbeat in the background where you're just like waiting for the next room to load, and it take forever. But if you're playing on an HDD, it would take like 4 seconds or something to load the next room, if you installed the game on the hard drive. And actually, now that I brought up that I had multiple PS2s, I can explain why. There's this game my dad and I used to play, called Champions of Norath. Again, another favorite from PS2 era. It was basically a Diablo clone. It was like a top-down RPG loot kind of game. You'd kill enemies and pick up better and better loot. And had a really great fantasy story. I think it was based on Champions of Norath was based on. Was it based on Dungeons and Dragons? It was like wherever Baldur's Gate came from, I think. Anyway,
I think that would be Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was for whatever reason, the very first PS2 I owned, eventually the disk drive in it died while we were playing that game. I don't know if that game had like a higher read speed than other PS2 games and it just killed the drive or something. But we got another PS2, a brand new one, and after a few months playing that game with my dad every day, the same game, Champions of Norath, the disk drive died in it.
Ooh, yikes.
So, again, I don't know if it was just that game or what, or we just had bad luck, I don't know, but we ended up getting... next, we ended up getting the small PS2, which had the built-in, the slim PS2, which had the built-in network adapter, and it's subjective whether or not you like the powered disc tray that slid open, or the slim PS2 went back to the PS1 version of the manual spring-loaded pop-up. Where you load the disc in that way. But I personally think the Slim PS2 is the best version. That's the one I still have and still use. And again, maybe they used a better quality disk drive in that one, because we played the heck out of Champions of Norath on that console, and it's still running today. So,
I remember we were talking the other day too. I mentioned we mentioned Episode 1 Racer earlier on the Dreamcast. We both liked also Racer Revenge on the PS2.
Right?
You remember that one?
Yeah. And actually, I was just looking up some gameplay footage of that the other day, and I still vastly prefer Episode 1 Racer on N64, and I guess Dreamcast as well. I didn't play the Dreamcast version, but honestly, Episode 1 Racer on N64 is one of my favorite racing titles of all time. But yeah, Racer Revenge, it improved the racing, the pod racing a bit. It obviously had better graphics.
And it was Rainbow Studios, the guys who do ATV Off-Road Fury.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think what Racer Revenge was lacking, if I remember correctly, was it didn't have as much of like a story mode. Like, there wasn't as much... I don't think there was many maps or tracks, and I think it also didn't have that same kind of progression that you had. Like, I don't think it had like an RPG kind of system where you leveled up the characters like the first one had. Because I remember in the first one you could like buy parts from Watto and like upgrade your pods. And I don't think Racer Revenge had that, if I remember correctly. It was more of an arcade racer.
No, you're absolutely right. It was a much smaller game.
Yeah.
What I liked about Episode 1 Racer is, what was his name? Watto? He'd yell at you to get out of his store if you didn't have enough money.
Yeah.
It's funny about that game, too. I know we're talking about it on Dreamcast and N64. I actually first played it on PC, and actually, you're going to find this funny. That was actually a game I don't remember if it had a graphics card built in or whatever, but I actually had to upgrade my graphics card to play that game, which I know is an odd thing to do that game, but I did.
That reminds me of a side note, and this is from an older generation, but speaking of upgrading stuff, I remember getting Need for Speed 2 for PC for Christmas or birthday or something when it was brand new. And we installed it on the computer. We installed it on the computer, and in fact, I think I still have the box for it. We installed it on the computer, and it ran at like 2 frames per second. But my parents, we didn't have the know-how or the money to upgrade the computer, so we just gave it to my cousin, who had a much better computer. I remember being like shocked, like watching him play it on his computer when it was running at like 60 frames per second or whatever.
Crazy, night and day.
Yeah.
I think the PS2 as well was one of the first consoles where you could, with the hard drive at least, install Linux as well. I think you could do that on the Xbox as well. And funnily enough, I think the GameCube ran on a proprietary version of Linux as its main operating system. But I think PS2 was the first one where you could, kind of set up your own thing, kind of homebrew.
Huh.
Yeah, and speaking of homebrew, I know Dreamcast is really big right now in the homebrew. Well, not super big, but the definitely.
Oh, well, enough so that I think last year there were like 8 games that came out for it.
Huh.
Yeah, absolutely.
From that scene,
Oh, that's cool.
But really quick, I wanted to touch on optical drives. Just because this is going to be something that that's going to be in the near future, something we're going to have to be concerned about with the game consoles from this generation and up. Is optical drives by their nature are going to burn out and are going to die, and like you said about the PlayStation 2, with your story, I remember our Wii. We went through like 3 optical drives on the Wii initially, because my brother would play Smash Brothers on there so often, and it was very it was just very weird. And so I'm me collecting GameCubes and stuff. I'm starting to run into some GameCubes where not a lot, but we're starting to get some burnout lasers and stuff like that in the optical drives. And fortunately GameCubes are a dime a dozen, but it's gonna start being like right now Dreamcasts are concerned because it's a GD-ROM and rather than a traditional CD drive or a DVD based drive, because even though the GameCube uses proprietary disc, it's still technically DVD laser. It's still DVD.
Well, and the Dreamcast can read.
Replaced.
And the Dreamcast can read CDs. In fact, it's the mill CD, which is for karaoke.
Right.
That's what enabled people to make the backups. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That it's a growing problem. But the nice thing is, if you look at some of the forums like Assembler Games, great forum by the way. If you're into classic gaming, you should definitely check that out. There's a lot of people working on. There was in the news even a guy that came up with a hard drive replacement for the disc drive in a Sega Saturn. The stuff's been around like that for the Dreamcast and the Xbox, obviously. So there's preservation going on, thankfully. But you're right. It's definitely an issue, especially if you want to play it the original way for or for say a museum, to kind of show it off, which is something else, which is nice. I've seen more and more talk and more. Actual happening, I guess, of video game museums, which is nice to see.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, they they have like a USB solution for the optical drives for the Dreamcast and stuff. So it's awesome that the preservation's already happening, and it's important. But yeah, I'm checking out one of my Discord groups right now, and right now it's exploding because some moderators got banned and stuff. So I'm just like, oh, what's going on? But
the one other thing too I wanted to touch on the PS2 before we went on to the GameCube. I'm curious what you guys think. Unfortunately, I don't think the video on it cleans up as it's aged. Some of the other consoles you can do stuff with, but the PS2 to me just doesn't clean up as well as, say, the Xbox or the GameCube or even the Dreamcast. And it's a bit disappointing, so I was curious if you guys had better luck, maybe with a PVM or a BVM, those broadcast monitors or professional monitors. Let me know what you think.
Well, one problem with the PS2, and I don't know if this was the same with GameCube. I'm pretty sure it wasn't with Xbox, but the PS2 was natively interlaced video. I mean, all problems with video with PS2 can be fixed with an emulator, but with the PS2 native, it definitely that was really weird about the PS2, was that it was interlaced.
Well, I just meant too, it looks dirty and fuzzy compared to the other ones, but again, maybe that's just personal preference.
I don't know how so. Because like when I was replaying my Xbox recently on my HD TV with, I believe I was using a composite, or I was using, well, whatever. When I was replaying it recently, it seemed kind of fuzzy, which is to be expected. I mean, these games are not running.
No, I know that. Yeah,
720p even.
Yeah, I think I think Atari Jaguar was like one of the first consoles to support like progressive video. Yeah, because I remember there was an option in Tempest 2000 where you could switch between interlaced and progressive. But I think a lot of the consoles by default they produce an interlaced video because we're still talking about CRTs and stuff back in the day.
Exactly, yeah.
But
which is where these all look the best too. Still, I mean, when you connect these things to a CRT, they still look beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
another
what
they're meant to be played on.
Exactly, yeah. And that's another thing that's again going back to conservation though. CRTs, everyone should start grabbing one soon before they're really going to start getting difficult to come by. I mean, I don't think we're going to hit that for a while though. But I mean, I think it's important that if you're going to be somewhat serious in your video game setup, to at least grab at least one CRT.
And as a tip, admittedly now, even what they're calling old stock is like 720p HD televisions. That's what you see now. But near where I live, there's it's for remained furniture from hotels and such, and I got some CRTs from there. They had like 36 inches all the way down to 13 inch. You could get any size you wanted. They were $25 a piece, and they were in pretty good shape. Had all the inputs, and you could get them. Again, pretty dirt cheap. Like you can also go to Goodwill and stuff, but unfortunately, those are sometimes a little more beat up. These were, really nice condition, but they're going away, like I said, even with the 720p televisions kind of taking their place as the new old stock. So, yeah, like Max was saying, if you're going to get them, now is probably the time.
Yeah, I got mine in a flea market for like $8.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's it is a newer, like flat screen. It's not like a bubble. So
not the curved.
Yeah, it's not the curved ones, but it still produces a really nice image. And I was playing GoldenEye on it, and it looks really good.
Nice.
But yeah, it's an interesting dilemma to have. But what was I was watching a video on IGN about like the progression of Gran Turismo games, which in and of itself is really fascinating because of how the graphics. Just how amazing, like even on the PS2, how they just it went how the graphics changed. But yeah, you're right. There's something gritty about it on the PS2.
I think it might mostly be the resolution. I know Xbox games ran at a higher resolution than PS2, and GameCube might have as well.
Yeah, GameCube is. Well, when you go on the component video, it goes to like DVD quality, and then regular. I think it's like regular 640 by 480. I think.
Yeah, well, and see, I don't think did PS2 support? Did it have component video?
Yes. PS2 had component support and progressive scan on certain games, just like the GameCube.
Yeah, it actually says VGA on here. I didn't know that. But I don't know if that's like a
mod or
or like something that's like SCART or something like that, like in Europe or something. But
good point. And you mentioned the GameCube. I mean, that might be go ahead, Cam, and then I was going to say that might be a good segue.
Oh, I was just going to say I think the reason why PS2 looked more gritty was simply the resolution was lower. I think that I've actually read that somewhere that PS2 native resolution is surprisingly, alarmingly low for the generation, which is possibly why so many games ran so well on it. But because the textures and the models in PS2 games were fairly high resolution, but the actual display resolution of the image was lower, and so when you try to blow that image up, that's where you get that more fuzzy look.
Right.
I gotcha. And the other thing too that was good about PS2, I like the pressure-sensitive buttons. Were they the first ones to do that?
I think so. Yeah.
And that digipad is perfect. That is the best digipad of all time for consoles, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you have the NES, but I mean for driving, I just love the digipad. To me, you had so much more control.
Yeah.
It's pressure sensitive buttons are so like such a interesting concept, and I think it's I don't think Xbox One doesn't even do pressure sensitivity, right?
I'm not sure. I know PS2 was first, but it might have. But either way,
sure
PS2 pioneered it.
Yeah, 360 didn't. So,
well, see, I think that's why too. PlayStation's always done well with sports gamers because for me, I mean, when I play sports games, with the exception of Madden, which I like on the Xbox, if I'm playing a basketball game or anything else, I love the PS2 controller for the pressure-sensitive buttons, but also just the feel and the way the controller handles for those sports games is just perfect, in my opinion. How about you
And
guys?
oh boy, speaking of sports games, real quick, how about the street games?
NBA
EA
Street, Volume
EA
2.
Big, NBA Street Volume 2, even NFL Street, I enjoyed. Those were like the sports games for people who didn't like sports.
Those were a ton of fun, very arcadey.
Yeah.
Let's see here.
But what did you ask, Jordan? You said how
Well,
about you
I was
guys?
going to say, I was going to say, Max had mentioned the GameCube. I mean, I was just I was thinking that might be a good segue because, it's funny because a lot of people now are going, I wish they had had a GameCube back in the day, and, that it was really an underappreciated console. And I don't know about you, Cam. I don't know if you had one, but Max and I had GameCubes, and we loved them. They were certainly overappreciated by us in their day.
Yeah, I had a GameCube. I got it fairly late. And really the main reason I got the GameCube, admittedly, was for the Resident Evil games that were exclusive on there at the time. Because I remember I got all the magazines back then. I always was reading magazines. I was always up on the latest and greatest stuff that was coming out, and always reading reviews on games, and so I knew Resident Evil 4 was coming for a long time, and I was so excited for that game. And I remember playing it. Unfortunately, the analog stick was broken on the GameCube, where I played it at a kiosk in a mall. But I remember even just playing like a little bit of it, I was just amazed by the graphics, and I was like, this is the future of Resident Evil. Yeah, I had to get a GameCube for Resident Evil 4, and then of course the fantastic best remake of all time, Resident Evil remake for GameCube, and the also fantastic Resident Evil 0. And then they also brought out they ported Resident Evil 2 and 3 to GameCube, and those were also good, but they were just they weren't remasters or anything. They were just direct ports. But I also got those just because I'm a Resident Evil fan.
Well, they had a lot
and they had Code Veronica X also on GameCube, which they ported over from PS2.
You're right, and I was going to say too, Silicon Knights, who did the great Eternal Darkness, which was an unbelievable horror title on the GameCube.
I also had
the
that,
remaster of Metal Gear Solid with the twin snakes.
Yeah, that was also a great remake. Yeah, I think the only thing I didn't like about Twin Snakes was the voice acting. They redid the voices, and I remember seeing a comparison video recently, and the voices were not as good in the remake, in my opinion. But everything else, yeah, it was they improved a lot of things over the PS1 version.
Well, what I loved about the GameCube too was I think the Wavebird was the first real wireless controller. Not one of those infrared things. I mean, it predated the Xbox 360. I think it was the first real where you didn't have to worry about getting it in the line of sight and all that. It just really worked well, and the delay on it wasn't that bad.
Yeah,
the Wavebird is phenomenal. It's
it really is. Yeah, it's a great controller.
Yeah, the GameCube in general, the controller on the GameCube is like my favorite controller of all time. It feels so unbelievably good. The triggers are phenomenal. I really kind of miss that dual action, like the analog, but also the click.
The click at the end.
Yeah, the click at the end is awesome. Fantastic analog stick. The C stick is definitely the weakest part of the controller, but it's not horrible. The main analog stick's great, and the good layout on the buttons. It's a phenomenal controller.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other great things about it too were, for example, the GBA link cable to link up like with Metroid Prime, and in my opinion, one of the greatest peripherals of all time, the Game Boy player.
Oh yeah, the Game Boy player is also like really, really, really fascinating because that's like one of the main reasons why a lot of people still have their GameCubes and not like playing
on the Wii.
On the Wii is because of that backwards compatibility with the Game Boy, and that's what a lot of people are doing right now with the GameCube. But before I get to that, I just want to talk about how I got the GameCube, because again, the GameCube was my very first current gen console. It was when my mom and dad were like, I bugged the crap out of them about wanting to get a GameCube, and they were like, "Okay, we'll get one for you." So once they realized that, they were so against video games because they had this stigma of like, oh, our kid's going to turn into a butthead if he if they play video games. But once they realized that that's just, we were going to turn out normal, they're like, okay, you could have video games. So, but relatively, yeah, within reason. But yeah, the GameCube was my very first console that was current gen, when it came out. So, I absolutely love it. It's a nice compact console with the handle and everything. Being portable with it is really not a problem at all.
I was always so afraid holding that thing by the handle that I was going to break.
No, it's really well, like, it's really sturdy.
I always had to hold it with two hands to trust it.
What was it? Initially, there wasn't a whole lot of games for it, but it eventually built a pretty solid library. The
launch had some pretty strong titles. Luigi's Mansion, I think, is underrated. Yeah. Pikmin, Star Wars Rogue Leader. I'm not going to include Universal Theme Park Adventure, but I think we all experienced that one.
Man, that was the very first time I saw a video game, not video game, but a GameCube disc was Universal Theme Park Adventure, where it was actually smashed in the middle of the parking lot of my local dentist's office. So, for whatever reason, someone wanted to get rid of their copy and discarded it there. So,
for whatever reason, I can think of a lot of reasons.
Well, I just remember we were talking once before, and I was talking about some other GameCube game, and then Cameron was saying, "Well, there's one game," and I was. The second he started describing it, Max and I, we just knew. It was like, oh, Universal Theme Park. That's why I had to bring that up.
But yeah,
we all thought it was different too. I think when we got it, we thought it was we all had different ideas of what the game.
Yeah, we all had different expectations. Yeah, and then
whenever I play it, I feel like I'm playing like a test game.
It's like a tech demo.
Yeah, like from an SDK or something,
Yeah,
It's very, very, very.
Yeah,
weird.
It doesn't feel like it was meant to be played by consumers.
Oh, and I thought of another launch title that was really good too, Wave Race Blue Storm. Did you guys play that one?
Oh yeah, I actually played that at my my local my orthodontist office. He had a GameCube set up and I was playing Wave Race.
What is it with GameCubes and dentists? And
well, my dentist was out of date. He had a Sega Genesis, but that was really cool.
No, my orthodontist, he had the Genesis for the longest time. And instead of getting a Dreamcast, he got a GameCube.
Well, my dentist had a Genesis, I think, till, I want to say 2006 or 7.
Wow. Yeah,
and then
mine
he
had
upgraded to the PS2.
Oh, man, that's funny. Yeah, all that money for those surgery, I can't even think right now. But another great title, what introduced me to the series, Metroid Prime. What a phenomenal game.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Retro Studios, wow. That blew people away, because no one thought Metroid is a first-person shooter, I don't know, but they pulled it off, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it just had such a great atmosphere. That was really like the time where we saw Samus as she was meant to be, as a bounty hunter.
Oh, absolutely. And if I remember right, too, I think we're all big Metroid Prime fans, but Max is probably the biggest. I think you liked Echoes even better than the original.
Yes, okay. So I think I like both games equally, but Echoes was like kind of like retro going. Metroid Prime was our love letter to Super Metroid. Echoes is us doing our own story and everything, and I love the I admit it's just a slight edge with better graphics, not much. It's very minute, but it's there. The design of the Varia suit, I like a lot more. So they used the Varia suit in the first game, is awesome. But the second one, they kind of refined it just a little bit more, gave her visor a little bit more personality. And that's the same suit they used for Metroid Prime 3. But I love. There's just the Luminoff, I think, are fantastic design and really cool, like alien moth species and stuff. It's just Echoes is just like a phenomenal sequel because that's like the first game is like so difficult to follow up, and they went ahead and hit that. But everything about that game is so good. But I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity to, mod your GameCube so that way you can take advantage of the digital video out. Because if you're not aware, the first generation of GameCubes from 2001 to 2004 have a second video port in addition to your traditional composite video out, and it's a digital AV out, and you could hook up component cables. The problem is Nintendo sold the component cables online exclusively, and because only like 1% of like American consumers had televisions at the time that were capable of displaying component video. So as a result, the cables are really rare now, and they're going for at least $200 on eBay. And the reason why component cables haven't been duplicated is because they have proprietary digital to analog converters in them. And so people haven't been able to reverse engineer them until recently. And with back in 2014, 2015, some guy made a open source solution called GC Video, and it's you put it on what's called an FPGA, which is a type of circuit board that emulates.
It's a field programmable gate array.
Exactly, and those things are awesome because it's the next level of emulation because they emulate hardware. And because the problem with emulation is that you can emulate the hardware on a high level, but any sort of nuances or quirks that happen lower on the processor level may be more difficult to recreate. So while Dolphin, the GameCube emulator, is awesome, they may not emulate every single minute thing, especially if you're doing like a Twitch, not like a speed run or something. So that's where the FPGA comes in, because it emulates the hardware on a low level, and so you end up with recreating the digital to analog converter, but also the instructions on how to convert the signal to something, let's say, like HDMI. And so this effectively gives you an HDMI port, future-proofing the console. And I tell you, Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2 look absolutely stunning. Because you get to see the games in 480p and in its pure un-anti-alias form, so it's like playing like the games on an emulator, but it's constant 60 frames per second, constant crisp image. Like when I was playing Metroid Prime 2, I was telling Jordan and Cameron earlier, like this, you could see details I've never noticed before, or at least, not like while I was, during gameplay, I would like you to really look at something, you would have to like pause the game and look at it in the logbook or whatever. But like I was noticing details while during combat, and was like, I've never noticed that before. So it was very, you'll get, the thing is, if you're like, the only caveat to the upgrade though is, if you decide to get the HDMI, be aware that you're only going to really see an improvement on the progressive games. So you're not going to see a huge improvement with regular games that are interlaced, because it's still going to be kind of fuzzy and stuff. But it's also, if you want to get your Game Boy games in a really nice upscaled resolution with your Game Boy player, that's also another reason why a lot of people are going with the HDMI upgrade.
Well, and I think another thing we should touch on is obviously Super Smash Bros. Melee. We can debate which is the best Super Smash Bros. Game, the original or Melee, and that is certainly a close race. But Melee is the top-selling GameCube game with 7.5 million units. What do you guys remember of that game? And why don't we talk a little bit about which is better, or maybe they're even, the original and Melee?
Well, I guess both games were different. I mean, obviously Melee it was a logical upgrade. It had better graphics. It had a lot of the same characters, a lot of the same maps. But I mean, just speaking for myself, Melee is my favorite Smash Brothers game. But I do love the N64 one also.
Yeah, it's definitely a close race, but I get what you mean. It's a logical upgrade, but for me too, it kept that arcade style that was so fast-paced that unfortunately I think they slowed it down too much in Brawl.
Yes,
but
I definitely agree.
Melee and the original had it perfectly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree. I think Chris agrees as well. I think Melee is definitely like the best title. Yeah, it's definitely in my. Because I always loved the Ice Climbers, and when they took those out for it was Smash 4, I was really disappointed because I really enjoyed that gameplay mechanic and stuff. But we still had Mr. Game & Watch, so I guess that wasn't too bad. But
who did you all mostly play? Who was your main?
Hanzo, but no, Ice Climbers, Mr. Game & Watch, that was actually pretty much it. Yeah.
I always liked using Fox.
And
Captain
me,
Falcon too.
Falcon Punch. For me,
show your boobs.
For me on the N64 version, I remember mostly playing Samus, and then on Melee, I started getting into a groove with Ness, and I remember playing against a lot of people at school at USF. Who I considered to be much better players than me, and I would play against them, and I'd play Ness, and it was like some combo I would use on the C stick, and a lot of people thought that was cheating, but whatever, it's there. There's some combo I used on the C stick that was like unbeatable. Like people just couldn't touch me. Like even like players that again I consider to be much better than me, I just totally beat them with some combo on the C stick I would use with Ness. It was really pretty funny.
I gotta say too, this era of consoles, and especially with the GameCube, had some of the best Star Wars games. I had mentioned Rogue Leader before, but Rebel Strike, Bounty Hunter, the Battlefront games. Tell me some of your favorites.
Yeah, well, of course. Arguably the best Star Wars game of all time, my favorite, is KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic. for Xbox, and then PC.
And I was going to add in, too, because I love the original Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight. They had Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy.
Oh, yeah.
Those were great. And Republic Commando. Oh,
yes, and Republic Commando, yeah. I was recently replaying Jedi Academy, and that game is still great. I mean, it didn't get great reviews, even less. I think Jedi Knight 2 a lot of people liked, and then Jedi Academy got lesser reviews. I think because it had some bugs or something people were annoyed with. I forget why it got lesser reviews, but or lower scores. But I just really like Jedi Academy because you can actually wield 2 lightsabers and a staff, and you could change like your lightsaber color to like these different wild colors. You could have a custom character. Jedi Knight 2, you were locked to, and this is speaking specifically for the multiplayer, especially.
Well, that's
Jedi
what I
Knight
loved
2.
about Outcast, the multiplayer, capture the flag and running around with the lightsabers. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and well, and Outcast had much simpler multiplayer because it was only one. You only had one lightsaber. There was like set characters and everything. Jedi Academy I liked because it expanded the cast. You had more characters to choose from. You had custom characters to choose from, and you had staffs and dual wielding lightsabers, which was cool. And there's more force powers and stuff like that. But yeah, I really like both games.
Great about Battlefront 2 as well, when you brought in the heroes and you could use the force powers and the lightsabers, because I love those 2 Battlefront games, especially the second one.
Yeah. Yeah, and Battlefront 2 was last time we had space battles, and then I guess I think they're coming back in the new Battlefront game. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm really sad that Battlefront 3, the original, didn't make it. That was the one being developed by the guys who made the Time Splitters games this generation, which was so great, and it was essentially the original GoldenEye team, Free Radical, and they were working on it, and you could seamlessly go from land to sky to space. It was really cool.
Yeah, I remember seeing the trailer for it.
Yeah, that gameplay footage, too. That was just really, really cool.
Yeah.
And, I know we're kind of already venturing into Xbox as we were talking about KOTOR and KOTOR 2, which was great as well. Any last thoughts on the GameCube, though, before we go? I'll start off with one. I may have mentioned it before, but I very much enjoyed how the GameCube... I guess enjoyed might not be the right word, but impressed by how they built the operating system. It was essentially a custom version of Linux, and it obviously worked really well because it was able to remain competitive with the PS2 and the Xbox.
The GameCube is again, I think people are only really discovering it now as how good of a console it really was. I think Nintendo alienated a lot of third-party people, which I think definitely did not contribute to GameCube being as successful as it could have been. It still did a pretty darn good job, but the hardware was there. The games that did come out for it, for the most part, especially first party and second party, it was really, really strong. It may have been a little bit more difficult to program because it's a PowerPC processor, but the GPU flipper on there, super, it's actually, I think, a bit more powerful than the PlayStation 2 actually. So again, that was another thing, is I think a lot of people didn't know just the potential of what the GameCube could have done in terms graphic wise. So it was actually quite advanced.
And like you said, it was built like a Mac on PowerPC architecture, which then ironically was also done by Microsoft with the 360 later on.
Exactly, yeah. And it's funny because the PowerPC architecture, in order to I don't know how exactly it's implemented, but I know in the chain and the pipeline for developing games for the GameCube, it did essentially need a Macintosh in the process to compile stuff. So I'm sure there was one that was like an optional thing. I'm sure you could like compile stuff regularly, but I knew there was like one part like in order to look at like code or something, or you had to throw in a Mac in there as well. But
so Mac and Linux on the GameCube, that's kind of a neat combo.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And and my beef again with third party support was one of my games growing up with the GameCube was I love the Need for Speed series, and Need for Speed 6, which was like the last good like exotic car focused Need for Speed, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, I should say. And the GameCube port is just so lackluster, and it's such a shame because it's a completely different game on the PlayStation 2. When I first saw it on PlayStation 2, I'm like, oh my god, they removed so much stuff. It was really quite sad.
The primary thing I remember was because the GameCube was lacking R2 and L2. You didn't have those powers you could use. I can't remember now what they were. It was like one of them you could like slow down time or something. I forget.
Yeah.
I powers on the PS2 and Xbox version that you didn't have access to on GameCube.
But I think, and now homebrew's starting to be possible with it. It's again a little bit complex because of the
architecture.
Yeah, the architecture, and also the fact that the game discs are a bit different and stuff.
The mini DVD.
Yeah.
There's something I wondered about that too. I mean, I'm a big defender of the Nintendo 64 sticking with cartridges because of the load times. It made developers more creative. I still think it was a good move for them, in my humble opinion. But with the GameCube, while I thought as a kid the mini DVDs were cool, I'm still not exactly understanding it because, much like the Dreamcast, you're limited to, I think, 1.2 to 1.5 gigabytes worth of data, and I'm just not sure. I mean, obviously the Dreamcast, it was an economic issue, but with the GameCube,
it was a piracy.
I guess I just don't understand.
Piracy
Oh,
issue.
yeah, piracy, yeah. But I mean, at the same time, you think they'd balance it out and go, but look, we could be more competitive this way. But a lot of games ended up needing 2-disc versions or 3-disc.
No, you're absolutely right, because that was the thing, because that games that had a lot of cutscenes, that normally fit on one disc on like the Xbox or the PlayStation 2. Let's say like Enter the Matrix, required 2 discs for the GameCube, and so that was another problem too, because like when you think about it, Metroid Prime, I think when you I've been hacking it on the audio side of things to get the sound effects and stuff, and I think when you decompress all the audio for it, it's like 86 megabytes. But when you take into consideration first off, that's like the raw waves. When you compress it, first off using the 80 PCM codec, and then you compress it even more with, I think it's a like a SIP archive. I don't know what the compression. I forgot the compression algorithm, but you have first you compress it in a audio codec, then you compress it even more in a file compressor. I think it's like the final file size for the audio is like 10 megabytes or something. It's like it's absolutely insane, like how much they were able to squeeze on that disc. It's really if it wasn't for file compression and stuff, a lot of games would not be possible on the GameCube game disc. So that's another thing to take into consideration. So,
well, moving on to the Xbox, one of the first things I wanted to touch on was, we were talking about it before, and Cameron mentioned 2 very cool games that he grew up with. Cameron, could you tell us a little about, I think you were talking about, there was a racing title and kind of a game like Dynasty Warriors.
Right, so one of the things I love about Xbox the most is that it had, like you were talking about earlier with the Dreamcast, the Xbox had some kind of experimental titles, some niche titles, underappreciated titles, sleeper hits, you might call them. And Kingdom Under Fire: The Crusaders is one of my favorite games on the Xbox. And I think really an underappreciated title. I think it has a lot of design elements that you don't normally see together, and I don't think you see together even today. But I think they work really, really well together. And I think if developers would look back at games like that, I think they could get some really good ideas. But yeah, Kingdom Under Fire was basically an RTS with a hack and slash aspect to it. Also, you would go through this cool like fantasy story, and you would control battalions of troops. Start out, of course, small, and then you'd work your way up to bigger and bigger troops. And between missions, you manage your troops, and you can level them up and put points into them and stuff, and give them more skills. And which was a lot of the strategy to it. And you would go into battle with your troops, but unlike an RTS where you're just controlling everything from above and just watching the action, when your troops actually clash with the enemy troops, the camera swings down, and then it's a hack and slash, and then you control the main character who you're playing as, the protagonist of the story, the campaign you're currently playing, and you just hack away and use button combos and stuff. And to me, that formula never got old. It was just such an enjoyable game. It was just watching like all these troops go into battle and hearing like the battle cries and stuff as the troops are getting closer to each other, and then you go into battle with the enemy and you see all these fights happening, and it's really like playing a Lord of the Rings game pretty much. And really impressive for the time, how many characters were on screen. I mean, Dead Rising on 360 touted, you'd have over 100 zombies on screen at once or something like that. I don't know if you could have over 100, but I definitely in Kingdom Under Fire you could have many tens of enemies on screen at once. And it might slow down sometimes, especially when there was like spell effects and things going on. But yeah, it was just a really great game. And then it had a sequel called Kingdom Under Fire Heroes, which was a little more buggy, but it was still same basic gameplay. It still had a great story, great writing. The Kingdom Under Fire games are also known for having a really awesome heavy metal soundtrack, which contrasts with the fantasy visuals. But yeah, and then the other game I was going to mention was a launch title for the Xbox, Reckless, the Yakuza missions. That game was probably known by many people as having the Back to the Future DeLorean in it, or at least the car looked similar. And yeah, I really liked that game because it reminded me a lot of a game on PlayStation I used to play a lot as a kid called Felony 1179, which I don't know any other way to describe these games other than they were a smash 'em up. You'd basically go into a mission with a car, and the world is designed to have tons and tons of smashable objects, and you get points or you get money or whatever from just smashing as much crap as you possibly can, along with mission objectives and things like that. Like you might have to get from point A to point B, or you have to tail somebody, chase a car down, destroy it. You might have to destroy certain objects within a time limit or something like that. But yeah, Reckless was similar in that respect. It just had really impressive damage models on the vehicles for the time. And unfortunately, Reckless was ported to... Well, fortunately, it was ported to PS2 and GameCube, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, I think it might have been done by a different studio or something, or for whatever reason they used a different engine on those ports, and it was a very different game. The physics were different. The damage models didn't look as good. Didn't have as nice effects. I think it was actually missing content. I don't know if it had. I don't think it has many missions. It was a very different game. It was unfortunate, but yeah, if you ever get a copy of the Xbox version, it's a great game. Great racing game, or great driving game.
I've been really meaning to try that one out, because I see it all the time for GameCube and stuff. So I've been, I don't know what the difference are between the GameCube and the Xbox port, but I know that's a game that's on my to-do list for sure.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of great. Oh, go ahead.
Well, also similarly, I mean, Max, you would also appreciate. Although I think you said you've played it before, but Midtown Madness 3.
Yes,
it was also a driving game. Not so much a smash 'em up, but it was a driving game, racing through city streets.
There was some, not as much as a smash up, but you could smash up the cars pretty well. There was some good damage models and stuff, but Midtown. The first two Midtown Madness is such an interesting game series for me because the first one is a good example of a good PC racing game, and they were one of the first games to do like just the cruise mode where you just drive around doing whatever the hell you want, and that was a lot.
Which was also in the Midnight Club games.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. And Midtown Madness 2 was like, it's like I just made an interesting parallel here. Midtown Madness 1 is like the Dreamcast game, and Midtown Madness 2 is like an N64 game because the frame rate in Midtown Madness 2, I think, is like locked at 30. Or whenever I played it on my Windows 98 HP Pavilion computer that with Intel integrated graphics, oh boy, that computer loved playing that game.
64 megs of VRAM.
Yeah. Oh, that computer loved that game so much. It was like, I'm going to display a nice blue graphic for you called the blue screen of death. That game ran so horribly on there, but it was like 15 frames a second the majority of the time, and but they coded that so quickly, because the first game was such a success, so they made the sequel, and really they didn't. It could have been better, honestly, but it wasn't like a whole absolutely horrible game either, but. And then
the third one was Dice.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a completely different game altogether. It's only like really only relation is in name, but a completely different engine. Completely, you still have the cruise thing and stuff, and checkpoints and stuff. But that's really and similar car lineup, but that's really only it. But so they're Midtown Madness 3 is again a completely different game altogether. It's almost like DICE made a racing game, and then Microsoft came in and slapped the Midtown Madness 3 title just so it could sell. You know what I mean?
That kind of thing happens more often than you think. Hey, let's put this name on. I mean, that's, if you kind of go back to the GameCube a little bit, that's Star Fox Adventures. I mean, originally it was Dinosaur Planet, and they were like, hey, let's add Star Fox to it. But I mean, in that case, it worked well.
Yeah.
At least I thought.
And also in this era, we forgot to mention, actually, on PS2, another great, what actually ended up kind of being a sleeper hit a little bit was Silent Hill 2.
Yeah.
And that's considered a great game. That was originally, I guess the reason why I brought it up is that was originally not going to be a Silent Hill title.
I didn't know. What was it supposed to be?
That's right. I forgot
just
about
its own thing.
I think it was just going to be its own thing. It was just going to be its own like horror game, and then midway through development, they were like, "Why don't we tie Silent Hill into here?" and
good move.
Yeah, and it worked. But it makes it really interesting because Silent Hill 2 is really and this is very strange for any franchise, but this is just how it happened. Silent Hill 2 is really actually like an offshoot to the series, which is strange for a direct sequel from an original title, but it's because it doesn't have any of the characters from the first game or any really real has absolutely no relation to the first game at all whatsoever, except for the town of Silent Hill. It's a completely different kind of story, completely different characters, and then the third game was the true sequel to the first game. It picked up where you're playing as the daughter of the guy from the first game, and he's in it too, and it picks up basically where, you know, years after the first game, picks up that same story. But the second one was a very personal story. It was very different from the others, and I think that's why people really like it, even people who aren't Silent Hill fans.
I remember, and Cameron, I remember you playing. That was the very first time I ever saw Silent Hill. A Silent Hill game was when you were playing it at Marcelo's. And I just remember seeing the monsters and stuff like that. Like they look like X's. It's like the two legs on top of the two legs or whatever.
Oh yeah, the mannequins. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going like, what is going on?
You know, this generation too, you really got more games that how do I put this? It really told more of a story. You know, they're very like take Shadow of the Colossus for example, or the God of War games. You know, not to go back to PS2, but you know, you really got more games that were more immersive like that. What'd you guys think of those titles?
More artsy.
Yeah, artsy. That's the word. Thank you. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. This was like the first. I think you were saying at some point, Jordan, that like this was like the first generation where we look back and we consider titles from this era as people say games as art, kind of. And yeah, I actually only recently played Eco for the first time. Shadow of the Colossus I played back in the day, back when it came out. I really liked it. And then Eco I played recently, and I didn't think I was going to like it as much. I don't know why, but it's really interesting. They're great games.
And obviously, too, since we're talking about Xbox, its best-selling game was Halo 2 with 8.5 million units. You know, Halo and Halo 2, obviously known a lot for the incredible multiplayer modes, but those two also told very engrossing, very detailed stories.
Yeah. I remember when I first heard about Halo, the first one. I remember everyone talked about the multiplayer, and I remember that was what I played first. I played it at a friend's house and stuff like that. I was like, oh yeah, this is really cool. You know, I get to play with the controller, and I got. Oh, it's first person. No, these really cool guns, cool sound effects. And it was really fun playing with friends. I'm really enjoying this. And I had no idea it even really had a campaign. And then I remember when I finally got an Xbox and I saw there was a single-player mode. Because I did know there was a single-player mode because I remember people telling me about it. I remember I was like, oh, there's a single-player. Okay, that's interesting. And then when I finally got an Xbox and I got Halo... and I was like, all right, yeah, I'll check out the single player mode. And I was just floored by like how cinematic it was, how good the writing was, how good the voice acting was,
how much of a ripoff of Aliens it was. And
yeah, well, I hadn't seen Aliens at the time. I hadn't seen it yet, but it's true. But it was. Yeah, it was a great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to distract you with that.
No,
throw you off with that.
You know, the other interesting thing too, talking about the Halo games, was multiplayer. And again, kind of going back, obviously SegaNet and Dream Arena came first. You had the SOCOM series, U.S. Navy SEALs, which were great on PS2.
Yeah.
But Xbox Live, especially with Halo 2, really set the stage. You know, I mean, that's what really made online gaming mass market. It was just incredible how, you know, it took off so quickly despite being $50 a year, and you know, you really needed a broadband connection, but it worked.
Yeah. I have so many stories I can tell about especially from the 360 era, but also from the Xbox era. Because I got an Xbox pretty late. I got it like 2004, 2005, but I built my library in it pretty quickly. But I used to go. We didn't get broadband internet until like 2007 or 2008. My parents just had dial up until like 2008.
It was a Friday. It's an inside joke.
Yeah. But so we used to. My grandma. She's getting up in age and everything, and so we used to go over there every weekend or every other weekend. I can't remember. Especially during the summers, we would go over every weekend, and help her out around the house and stuff. And I didn't have to go, so my mom and dad, were like, "Oh, we'll just help her out." But she had broadband internet, and I was like, "I'm gonna bring my Xbox.
I want to help."
Yeah, yeah. So I remember playing Halo 2, Rainbow Six 3, Rainbow Six Lockdown.
Black Arrow, those are some great ones.
Oh yeah, and Unreal Championship 2, I think it was called.
Yeah, that was there. They had
the one that was third
Counter-Strike
person
as well.
Oh yeah, Counter-Strike. Yeah. Which wasn't as good as the PC version, but
true. But I mean, it was like the first time you could play it on a console. I mean, that. Yeah. It's funny we were talking about Halo because Gearbox did such a great job porting Halo to PC, and then Cameron, we were talking about this before. They did an unbelievable port of Half-Life to the PS2.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Which we unanimously consider to be the best version of Half-Life.
Absolutely.
At least in terms of visuals, especially.
Well, even gameplay, it actually works surprisingly well with the PS2 controller, and if you wanted, they even allowed you to hook up a mouse and keyboard.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I remember playing those games online, and I also want to. I need to bring this up. I also, like I mentioned earlier, going back to PS2, one of my favorite games on the PS2 is Resident Evil Outbreak, and then its sequel, File 2, which really they didn't need a sequel. It was because it was basically the same game with some improved features, and then it had different scenarios, but it had the same characters and everything. It was basically just scenarios that were cut from the first game they put into the second game. But Resident Evil Outbreak, I feel, is a really underappreciated online title. Out of all of the survival games we have today, all the zombie games, all these people doing their own thing with zombies and survival stuff today, I think Resident Evil Outbreak really nailed on the head way more than Left 4 Dead. Like, I replayed Left 4 Dead recently with some friends, and I was like, this doesn't feel the same as Resident. I could see where Left 4 Dead is a very different kind of game than what people were expecting Left 4 Dead to be. Resident Evil Outbreak is a true multiplayer survival horror experience. I don't think any game has gotten it right since then.
Well, Left 4 Dead's great for different reasons, but I totally get what you mean.
Yeah. Right, yeah. No, yeah, I love Left 4 Dead, but it's definitely a very different game. It's not a survival game, in my opinion. Left 4 Dead is more of a... It's a shooter, it's a horde shooter, it's a...
protecting like your squad kind of thing.
It's a
it's got its own vibe.
Like shooter, yeah. Resident Evil Outbreak is very it's survival horror. It's like true classic survival horror with 3 other people. And what was so great about it was you had randomness to the scenarios, so it wasn't always, you didn't always get the same thing twice. So like you had to solve puzzles cooperatively with people. You had to cooperate to get certain items, to unlock certain doors, or get through a scenario, get through an area. and it's each scenario cycled through item sets, so things randomized like that. And also you had, like, if you had to get a key code for a door or something and input it into a computer, you couldn't just memorize the key code because it was different every time. And so you always had to take risks and go into situations that were really intense or really difficult. The controls weren't too clunky. People couldn't complain about the tank controls because it didn't have that. It had actual 3D controls. First time for the series. It felt really intense. It always felt really intense, especially once your character starts getting hurt. It had, and again, this is something that I still haven't seen again to this day, where your character, the more hurt your character was, the slower you would move. And they had really great animations for the characters showing how hurt they were, and like when you would go from like fine to caution to danger. Like once your character's in danger, you can't run anymore. You're like stumbling around and like you're holding your side and like crouched down or like hunched over. Your character's breathing really hard. And you could have one of your teammates help you, like carry you a little bit to help you move faster. And then once you get hurt enough, then you're crawling. You fall on the ground, you're crawling, and you can't even stand anymore. Bottom line, the Resident Evil Outbreak games just had a really intense atmosphere that I think a lot of survival games now, especially indie titles and stuff, have tried to replicate that and just can't get it right. It was really one of a kind.
Well, not to change subjects too much, I want to talk a little more too about the Xbox hardware, though. Xbox really got the whole modding scene going and brought that as close to the mainstream as it ever really got until maybe now. The other thing was obviously the Duke controller, which I still think is probably too big to this day, and then they brought the Japanese controller, the S over here. What do you guys think about that?
I never owned the Duke controller, but I really liked the S controller.
It really took over for PlayStation in terms of like the perfect controller. Not yet with the Xbox maybe, but with the 360 for sure, in terms of just being the kind of the perfect fit. Yeah,
that layout was just really to go with the layout like that was really ingenious.
Yeah, the original I never owned an Xbox while it was out, but the original Xbox controller is just such a enigma of weirdness. It's like it's those black and white buttons, and it's just such a, again, really really bizarre. But the S really was like, okay, we realize what works and what doesn't, let's finesse it a bit, and they hit the ball out of the park with it, I think.
Yeah.
The other thing, go ahead.
Well, then 360 even more so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really took it to the next level.
With the exception of the D-pad, I think, but,
Yeah, the D-pad could use some work. If they could do the 360 controller with the PS2 D-pad, I think they'd be sick.
Yeah. Did they fix the D-pad on the Xbox One controller?
It's a little better. It's not perfect, though.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I was going to say, too, this is the generation where you really started to see a shift in the gaming industry. And, we could debate whether that's for better or worse, but there was increased M&A activity. I mean, obviously with Microsoft coming into the fold, Halo was huge because originally, we may have discussed this before, but Bungie had made the... oh God, I'm blanking on the name. Max, what's the Marathon games? The Marathon games on the Pippin and on the Mac, and that eventually Apple, they dropped the whole Pippin project, and they eventually moved on to something else. And Bungie kind of had to figure out where to go. And ironically, they ended up with Microsoft, and this game they were working on that was initially an RTS, then a third-person shooter, then a first-person shooter, became Halo. But in addition to Microsoft obviously having that juggernaut and also nabbing Oddworld over from Sony and getting, Munch's Odyssey as a launch title, and then later Stranger's Wrath. Microsoft bought Rare, took them from Nintendo in 2002. In 2003, that's when Square and Enix became what we know today as Square Enix, and they even bought Taito later on. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And then
Taito,
Sega...
yeah.
Taito, okay, thanks. And then, Sega merged with Sammy to form Sega Sammy Holdings in 2004, although that's more of an arcade deal, but still, it's worth mentioning. Konami bought a majority share of Hudson Soft, who did a lot of the Nintendo games like Mario Party, and that's when Namco merged with Bandai to make Bandai Namco. So, this is unfortunately when the middle started going away, and kind of at the point we're at now where you've got your Grand Theft Autos, you got your Call of Duties, you got your Madden footballs, and you got your indie titles, but there's no real in-betweens anymore, and to be honest, I miss that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Those
titles that are like... I feel like they were especially prevalent in the next generation, in Star Trek Next Gen. No. In 360 era... had a lot of those really weird titles that were like from companies you never heard of, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's like now it's all about the AAAs and what's the next Arkham's Creed, Far Cry.
Exactly. And it does remind me of something else here. If you don't mind, I want to tell a little story here. Another friend of ours, one of our longest Zoom platform supporters, Scott Miller, when he was running 3D Realms, they weren't just a developer, they were a publisher. In fact, he helped discover id Software by reaching out to John Romero. And another thing that he had done was they saw this top-down racing game called Death Rally that was made by a small Finnish developer called Remedy. And they even put Duke Nukem in the game. And so once that game came out, I think in 96, early 97, they're talking to Scott and they're saying, look, we've got multiple projects going, and they showed him a bunch of them. And I think one was another racing title, and one was kind of this film noir kind of detective game that I think they were going to call Dark Justice. And Scott said, that's cool, but, what if we took it in this direction and made it this real cinematic adventure, kind of like a third-person shooter? And that's what eventually became Max Payne. And that's one of the coolest games of this generation. Obviously, it took about 4 years for it to build, but when it came out, I mean, that was a huge deal. And Scott not only helped come up with the character name or rather, he did come up with the name Max Payne. He also is the one that they had this slow motion dying mechanic. And he said, you should do that, like, where you can use that. So and that was before The Matrix, I might add, that he came up with that, the bullet time kind of idea to kind of make it look like a John Woo movie. And, that was another real definitive title of this generation. And I always thought that was neat. And that's another thing where, that's something that came out of, let's say, the middle of the industry. With 3D Realms producing Max Payne, I believe even with the first one, they had already started negotiating with Rockstar, because eventually, I want to say 2002 or 2003, the whole Max Payne IP was sold to Rockstar / Take-Two Interactive for $48 million US dollars. And but that was another case of you could still build a AAA title from the middle. It didn't have to be Call of Duty 12, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's worth mentioning, bringing up Max Payne, games like Grand Theft Auto, Twisted Metal Black, which was the first mature rated Twisted Metal, and it was like really dark compared to the other games. This was the generation where games started getting more mature. I mean, obviously you had mature titles on PS1 and N60, even N64, and Dreamcast, but definitely with games like Max Payne and GTA 3, they dealt with much more adult themes. Whereas in the previous generation, you had mature games, but they were mostly mature for maybe a little bit of language, but mostly like blood and gore and stuff like that. But games like Max Payne, I mean, the whole catalyst for the game was the death of his baby. Like, I mean,
No,
if I
yeah,
remember
absolutely.
correctly.
Much, yeah. No, I think his wife was killed too. I mean, it
Oh,
was just
right, yeah.
It's kind of
Right,
like that
his wife and
Seagal
his
movie,
baby.
which is a little goofy itself. I mean, I'm a Seagal fan. I'll admit that. I like Above the Law and Under Siege, but yeah, I think it was Hard to Kill. That's how it starts off. It's weird because it's such a dark movie starting out, and then it just gets progressively cheesy right after that. like they just stomp on the accelerator. But no, you're absolutely right. And while technically not a console game, this is also when Postal 2 came out, and that was not so much dark, but yeah, I guess in a way, but kind of that twisted humor. I mean, they were even more raunchy, I'd say, than Grand Theft Auto. You know, that's another one we should bring up for sure.
Yeah. But yeah.
We were talking earlier too, about you guys were talking about Midtown Madness and a lot of the racing games. There were some. I know we talked about them before too, but there were some great racing games. Obviously, the entire Burnout series, especially Takedown, was this generation. Yeah. I'm trying to think. This was the first time we had Forza Motorsport, where Gran Turismo actually had competition. Of course, I still preferred, I think, like Gran Turismo 3 and 4, but again, this was the first time they really, had a contender, another contender in the arena.
Yeah.
The Burnout games are really, really, really a lot of fun. I was listening to the soundtrack for the first two games, and the first one's great because it does its own thing. It's got a very interesting electronic, but also hints of guitar, nice rock guitar, but also orchestral. A lot of heavy focus on orchestral strings and stuff like that. So it's very the very first Burnout is really eclectic, if that's the right word. Eclectic type of soundtrack, but Burnout 2, what a strong soundtrack. It's so good. It stands up really, really well to this day.
I should add too, the director's cut of Burnout 2 is the best version, and that one's exclusive to Xbox. So just to kind of keep us on the Xbox track a little here.
Isn't it though like the same as the GameCube port though, or
pretty much? I think there's very little difference, but it's still better. It's like just that much better. But yeah, it is the director's cut. And I was trying to think too, because I know we were talking about cell shading before, like Jet Set Radio. A lot of great cell shading games this generation. Obviously, we talked before about The Simpsons Road Rage and The Simpsons Hit and Run, which were great games. I mean, Road Rage was Crazy Taxi, as we discussed with the whole lawsuit, and Hit and Run was GTA with Simpsons characters. I had a blast with that one too. I was trying to think of some others. Wind Waker was cell shading. That was another great one.
Yeah, Wind Waker.
Cell Damage, I think, was this generation, right?
Yeah. That's another great car combat game right there. And that was by Pseudo Interactive, who'd go on to do Full Auto and Full Auto 2.
And Jordan, there's also 13.
That's right, with David Duchovny, Christian Eriksen, and Adam West.
Yeah.
I haven't played it. My brother has, and I've been meaning to. But I remember seeing this in the game magazines a lot. That I was like, I want to play this, but I heard it's kind of okay. Auto Modelista by Capcom. That was really interesting because you got real life cars, but they're cell shaded.
Cell shaded, yeah. That is a beautiful game, but I did actually play that recently on an emulator, and I can see why people criticized it. The driving physics are really not good. It doesn't feel good to play. Beautiful game, but the driving just doesn't feel right. It's something you have to experience though to know what I'm talking about, but it just doesn't feel right.
It was ported to the GameCube. I did not know that.
Oh really?
It was.
Speaking of GameCube ports, I'm not sure if it was a port or if it started off, but you guys mentioned Capcom, a game similar to 13. It was kind of like a first-person shooter, but with kind of an on-rails element. It was a really unique control style, very cool game that was on GameCube and PS2, but I know the GameCube version was just way better. Killer 7.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. I never played it, but yeah, I had always heard good things.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and Cameron, you were saying, too, I think earlier, there's another one where it was just GameCube and PS2, another Capcom title, actually, Resident Evil 4. Again, much better on the GameCube, especially the audio.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, the GameCube version is definitely definitive.
now this is really interesting. I actually just looked up. I had no idea there was a GameCube port for Auto Mona Lisa. And it's actually, there's very few on eBay. They want, this one guy wants $35 for it, and which is actually, there's like only 2 or 3 on eBay, like 2 complete in box and 1 loose disc. So that's really this. I like I said, I had no idea.
I'm surprised it's that cheap then.
Yeah. This is very. I may have to pick this up because
maybe because it's not very in demand.
Well, that too, yeah. But still, that's like. I had no idea there was a port of it for GameCube because I was always disappointed when I was a kid. Like, oh, it's not coming out for GameCube.
Didn't know that either. Huh.
So,
well, speaking of GameCube, another game I thought was kind of underrated on it. I mentioned Luigi's Mansion. What did you guys think of Super Mario Sunshine? I like that a lot.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't Mario 64, but it was a lot of fun.
Oh,
and that was Nintendo doing something. Well, Luigi's Mansion was also different, but that was Nintendo, doing something different with that franchise. And that was fun.
The gameplay is great in that game. Because I was trying it out on the HDMI thing and my HDMI modded GameCube. There is one problem with it though, is that when you start out, there's all these cutscenes and stuff. And boy, the cutscenes are like so poorly done. It's the animation's really awkward. The voice acting's really awkward. The storytelling's really awkward. There's I totally forgot how the game began, and after the first boss fight, which is one of the easiest boss fights I've ever played, on the airstrip, the landing strip in the airport, there's a cutscene where Mario is in court, the Delfino Island court, and they're going objection overruled, and I'm like, oh my god, am I playing Ace Attorney? It's very bizarre, and with the anime voiceover actors and stuff, and then Flood explaining, we are in prison now, you must save the island from we were framed, and it's just very very polarizing. From I had no memory of this, which is so bizarre because I played that game a lot, and
it was Perry Mason meets Mario.
It was it was very bizarre. It was really weird, and but once you actually get into the gameplay of it and stuff, it is really good. And lots of good music too. But that's
what's so great about Mario. I mean, especially Mario World, all of them. Mario 64, though, I think is probably my favorite, especially that the sunken ship level. That music, it just as a kid, it's just that beautiful atmospheric music that just it instinctively makes you want to go explore. I mean, that's what I've always loved about Mario games. I say it now older, but the inner child kind of thing, I mean, it really makes you just forget about all the evil in the world and just, you're a happy-go-lucky kid exploring, and I always love that about those games.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something I don't know if you know this, Jordan, but the music in Super Mario Sunshine, the vast majority of it is actually sequence. It's actually MIDI.
Very cool.
Yeah. So that's even believe it or not, I'm not sure about Breath of the Wild, but definitely Twilight Princess still uses the same music audio engine as Super Mario Sunshine, and so it's the same sequence music. So
and that was on the GameCube too. A lot of people think it's just the Wii, but there was a GameCube port of Twilight Princess.
Yeah, and that one's
Forgot about that.
Yeah, and what's really cool about the GameCube port of that is that it's actually different. It's actually all the worlds, all the levels and stuff, and all the maps are mirrored. So yeah, so it's a completely it's a different gaming experience essentially. So and that one's been going up in price too. Last time I checked, because it's people are just now realizing that, and it was one of the very last games to come out for the GameCube. So people been trying to grab that up. So it's but yeah, it's very interesting.
And with your HDMI mod, I'd love to see how those Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask remakes that came out on the GameCube look. Those ought to look great with your mod.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very. I have to go get my copy of that game from my brother. The promotional disc from my brother, because he has it. But I'm very interested to see that too, because it makes me wonder how, if like. Because like the N64 and the rendering pipeline introduced that anti-aliasing, and it makes me wonder if with the emulation on the GameCube does it do that anti-aliasing as well, or so I'm really interested to
well, dude, you'll have to tell us.
Yeah, there's a funny story. The funny story with that.
Report back.
We were playing Ocarina of Time on the GameCube, and we were it was very interesting, because it was a rare situation. It was just my brothers and I were all huddled around watching. I think it was my brother playing or whatever, and so we were all huddled around. We just got the game, whatever, and so we just completed the maze in the courtyard where in the beginning of Ocarina of Time, where Link has to go for the courtyard maze and get to Zelda. My dad came in, and we had to like go to church or something. He's like, "Hey, we got to leave right now." And we were just about to save the game, and he went over to the GameCube, turned off the power button, and all of my brothers and I all exclaimed in unison, like, "Oh my God, what did you do?" So it was that was the day my dad realized, okay, they have to save it first before he.
Yeah.
So it's it was.
I had a question for Cameron too. Sorry, I don't mean to change the topic, but when you're done, I wanted to get his thoughts on what he thought was better, either BioWare's Knights of the Old Republic or Obsidian's Knights of the Old Republic.
I was going to bring it up after Max was done too. Actually,
sorry. Go. Well, let's let Max finish and then go. I'm sorry.
I was finished. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the first game is better. And that's just speaking from. I mean, I haven't played. Well, I've actually been replaying the first one recently, but I haven't played both of them as a whole in like 10 years. But and this may sound. This may be like an immature view from a story reader perspective or story whatever perspective, but I mainly liked the first one better because of that plot twist at the end. I mean, to me, there was no better plot twist. Like, I still to this day, it blows my mind. Like, I just remember when that happened at the end. I had to like stop the game and get up and walk around for a while. Like, I was so blown away. I had never seen anything. I mean, nowadays we've seen that in games since then, but in movies and whatnot. But it was just incredible at the time. But the second game was Obsidian, as you said, instead of BioWare. And Obsidian has always been an interesting company. They always make fantastically constructed stories with interesting gameplay elements, but really buggy games. Usually as a result of not having enough time in development. But yeah, Chris Avellone, I'm pretty sure, was a writer on KOTOR 2.
He was.
And yeah, and yeah, KOTOR 2 had so although I think KOTOR 1 was overall the better game, better story, KOTOR 2 had, I think, better. It's hard to say, but I think it had better characters. I mean, you had HK-47, the wisecracking robot that was really evil, and there's a number of other characters. Yeah, there's I forget some of the names of the other ones now. There's like other ones that were. There's like a guy that was a bounty hunter. Had this lady who was like a priestess or something. There was like a number of other characters that, when you talk to them, when you're like off mission, when you're like in your ship or whatever, and you're going and connecting with the characters, they had a lot more to say and a lot deeper, richer backstories than even most of the characters in the Mass Effect games. I just remember sitting there for hours just talking to the characters. There was just so much dialogue. It must have been a nightmare to record, but but yeah, it's just, unfortunately, at the end, it kind of, the story kind of fell apart at the end of KOTOR 2, but a little bit.
Let's see here.
Oh, and Cameron, getting the PS2 at launch, I also want to get your thoughts. When you first played, did you get Metal Gear Solid 2 when it came out, and what did you think of it? Because I know that was a bit of a controversial title.
Yeah, no, I played the demo of Metal Gear Solid 2 and I loved it. And then later, a little bit later, I rented the full game and I really liked it. I didn't understand most of it at the time, and I actually recently replayed the entire Metal Gear Solid franchise, and so I got a fresh perspective on MGS2, and it is a wild game. Really,
I still love it. I don't know why people didn't like it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, no, it is great. It's really interesting political story. It's crazy. And then the third one's great as well. And then I played the fourth one for the first time when I played the whole series, and that's also great. Better than I was expecting too. I think I'd heard mixed things about the fourth one, but it was good. But yeah, the second one, when I rented it the first time, I got all the way to the end when Raiden is naked, and I shut off the game then. Because I mean, you know, my TV's in my living room, and I'm like, I'm not gonna play this game and run around as a naked guy. You know, my parents can see this, like. So I never beat the game, but then when I replayed it recently, what was funny was when I replayed it recently. Now I'm older and I'm replaying it. I got through the part where he's naked in like 5 minutes. So I was like, I could have just done this when I was a kid and it would have been over.
Yeah, I never understood why they did that. What was Hideo thinking? Like,
yeah,
what is he ever thinking?
There's I hope
that's true. It's always crazy. Although that ship level at the beginning is just incredible.
Yeah, that's why I loved the demo. It was just the tanker, and it was really awesome.
There was a great back when G4 TV was good and existing. They had X-Play, and Adam Sessler, who co-hosted it, did a segment about that level with Raiden, naked Raiden, and it was just like he was just constantly crouching and uncrouching and stuff, and he's like, no, don't do the cartwheel, no. It was really funny. But that's like the only thing I remember from Metal Gear Solid 2. And I haven't even played the game, but that's like the only. It's the naked.
Well, I'm really glad you brought up G4 because obviously Sessler and X-Play were great. Max and I, and Cameron, I think you may have seen it too, but I know definitely Max and I, we love the Icon series. I mean, that's how I figured out who Bernie Stolar was. Stephen L. Kent's book, The Ultimate History of Video Games, which is fantastic, by the way. Definitely check it out. Max, why don't you talk a little bit, your impressions from Icons and G4? Well, because this is the same era.
Yeah, well, Icons is really, again, that's how I first found out about Bernie as well, and found out about the history of the Dreamcast, and it's really fascinating. That was like the first time I ever saw like any sort of like document or
documentary.
Exactly. Yeah, and a documentary on video game history and stuff, and they also had Ralph Baer on the Magnavox Odyssey. That was the first time I saw the very first video game console, the Odyssey.
And
Gunpei Yokoi, the guy who created the Game Boy and the Virtual Boy, and one of the all-star engineers from Nintendo, it's really, yeah. So that was well, I remember G4 before then as Tech TV. Before,
yeah, that's right.
And I remember Tech TV, and that was awesome too. But G4, and it was because like before G4, I remember there was a show, and there's a couple episodes of it on YouTube. But I remember Nickelodeon had a show called Game Farm, and it's very 90s, very weird and over the top, and but they had one segment that was pretty cool where they actually opened up the game consoles and stuff, and like did a breakdown of like this is how they work and stuff. So it was really, I remember when he did that on the GameCube, and it was like, wow, that's what a GameCube looks like with the guts opened and stuff. And but they were like at the end of the segment, the co-hosts are moving like robots and stuff, and I'm like, okay, this is stupid. But
well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was what was nice about the Icons series, that it wasn't trying to be hilarious.
Yeah.
It wasn't trying to be like too serious. It had that perfect balance. And Machinima, I think that's how you say it, they had a similar series like in the late 2000s and early 2010s on the internet, these kind of like YouTube videos that were kind of similar, that again did a really great job, just like Icons. And that was I saw a great one about 3D Realms and Scott Miller, and they had a great one on like Medal of Honor, and how, I may have mentioned this before, but Kadurka's team that did Medal of Honor Allied Assault, when they left, they went on to create Call of Duty. I mean, like, you find out all sorts of cool stories like that. Or like with PlayStation, Bernie was talking about how, he's like he got them Ridge Racer, Crash Bandicoot, Battle Arena Toshinden. I mean, it's really amazing. It showed like all the different people and what everybody brought to the table. And I learned that I mentioned Bernie and Scott. Those guys really knew content, and then you'd find other guys who really knew the hardware, and they'd talk about like, God, I'm blanking here. Ken Kutaragi, the father of the PlayStation in terms of its design. I mean, they talked about he was, he was an executive who could, do the buttoned-up role, but then he could also, go dive into the trenches and, and handle a lot of the technical stuff. So it's just neat to learn about those guys and learn about how, how this all came together. And like you were saying, Ralph Baer, that was another great episode. And I remember I didn't meet him in person, but I actually talked to him on the phone and emailed him a bit, talking about like the games industry when I was first trying to get in. And he was very, very nice, very, very kind soul, great guy, was willing to take the time. And he unfortunately passed away, I think, a year or two ago. But he lived to be, I think, like 95.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, and I also, I remember Icons, I think they also did stuff on Atari as well, with like Nolan Bushnell and I'm forgetting his name. The guy who did E.T. and stuff. Warwick. So I can't believe it. HWS or something.
It starts with an H.
Yeah,
I think.
But yeah, that was really fascinating as well. Just the history of Atari, the pioneers, and because it's very. Like the only other way I found out about information about video game history like that was going to the getting Steve Kent's book, and going to the library and stuff, and that's because before then it was like, even Wikipedia had like, well, I didn't even know Wikipedia back then, it was that far back,
But there's another great resource. I mean, a lot of people don't give it enough credit. I mean, you can find out a lot of info there. I mean, like you'll find out like things like you didn't know. For example, I had loved Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast, but for some reason I never looked into, say, Soul Calibur 2, but I realized, I remember seeing the box, but it never clicked until now. Like, they had exclusive characters, like Link would be in the GameCube version, and I think Spawn was in the Xbox one. Stuff like that you'll find on Wikipedia.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because on Wikipedia, while we're talking in the past 15 minutes or so, while I was back on my Auto Mona Lisa kick, I found out Capcom also worked on publishing some Pitfall Syndicate games like Test Drive 5, and I remember Test Drive 6, which is a horrible, horrible game, but I found out that in Europe it was published by our good old friends Cryo Interactive.
Very cool. And I'm glad you brought up Pitbull, because if I remember right, I think they made it was on the Dreamcast. It was it predates Burnout, and it actually had you bashing cars off the track. I'm trying to
Demolition Racer.
Demolition Racer, No Exit. Yes, that's the one on the Dreamcast. And I think that again was Pitbull Syndicate, and that was a great one on the Dreamcast.
Very interesting. Yeah. Apparently, No Exit was actually the Dreamcast version, and the rest of them were just Demolition Racer.
Yeah, it was exactly, because it was on PS1 and Windows. But No Exit, that's the one I remember the best on the Dreamcast.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Something else we forgot to mention about this era was this was the beginning of custom soundtracks with the Xbox.
Cameron, didn't you? There was a game you did. I remember that you said it was like you made it like a time capsule with your own music.
When I loaded back in like 2004, 2005, I loaded a bunch of my music, pop punk stuff, like Blink-182 and stuff like that, onto my MXPX. I remember also onto my Xbox, and I played Forza. The original Forza, and I still to this day don't know what the Forza music, the actual music in Forza sounds like, because I only ever blasted my custom music in it, and that's, to me, like, that music, like my music, is the soundtrack to Forza. Like, that's what I remember from that game, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have played Forza as much if it weren't for that music blasting in the background, but I essentially made a time capsule out of it, because I stopped playing Forza in 2005. I only probably played it for like a few months or something like that at most, and then I didn't touch it again. And then in 2015, 10 years later, I had my Xbox hooked up to my TV because I was revisiting the Kingdom Under Fire series, and some other games, and also I had just recently gotten a component cable for my Xbox, so I was testing that out. The Warriors also. That's another game we should bring up.
Oh yeah, go ahead right now.
Yeah, well, first stay on topic. First, Forza. I revisited Forza in 2015, and it was just. It was literally a blast from the past, just hearing that music start up again, and the game just starts up again as if it's still 2005. It's crazy. I was just being blown away. But the Warriors, that was PS2 and Xbox, and then they also had a PSP port. That, in my opinion, is probably the best movie to game adaptation, and it's so interesting because it's an old movie. It's not like they were making the game based on the movie because it was brand new or something. It was, I guess, a passion project sort of from Rockstar, and It's a really great beat 'em up, and I really really love how it took the movie and expanded on the universe. Really, they brought back a lot of, or maybe all of, the actors from the movie to do voices for the game. I mean, actors who, some of them haven't done anything since 1979. And it's really, really just a bizarre game. Just came out of left field. Like, just all of a sudden, oh, hey, here's this Warriors game from Rockstar. And oh, holy crap, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's cool because that's when you had a couple movie-based games like that came out of nowhere that were really good. I mean, for example, EA did a great job with The Godfather, and then we were talking about Simpsons Road Rage and Hit and Run. Radical Entertainment did the Scarface game, and they did it where he doesn't get killed at the end, and then you just rebuild your empire, and that was very cool as well.
I never played that, but I heard the gameplay wasn't that great in it. But
I loved it, but I might be a little biased because I love the movie. But that and The Godfather, because I remember Godfather, they gave some of the same issues, but I like both those games a lot.
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting to me. How we have games. We typically think of games based on movies as just objectively bad, like because it's based on a movie. It was a cash cow, cash in, whatever you call it, just free cash basically. But these are games that were made based on movies that are like classic movies or cult hit movies or whatever, and they turned out pretty good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of too. It's classics, and it's when you have time. Because GoldenEye, I mean, they gave him essentially an extra 2 years. That came out 2 years after the movie, and I think that helps too. You're not in a rush,
right?
But,
yeah, definitely.
But still, you're right. When you pull up a classic movie, and like you said, as a passion project, they really did a great job.
Yeah.
Isn't the guy from Windows from The Thing? Isn't he in the Warriors?
Yeah, he's I forget the character's name now, but yeah, he is in the Warriors.
Gotcha. I know one really interesting game that based off of movie. It's technically this was before Tron Legacy came out. It was back in 2003, Tron 2.0, by Monolith.
That was a great one.
There's another example.
Aliens vs. Predator 2 that they did around the same time. Another great underrated game.
Tron put,
and also there was a game based on The Thing too.
That's right.
That was actually pretty good.
That was great as well, and I think that was a Konami game of all
yes,
people.
Really.
Yeah, and I remember that game was. Oh, I think it might have also had. Oh no, never mind. No, yeah, Konami. But I remember The Thing was interesting too because I remember you could never. It was the whole idea of like you could never trust your AI partners that you'd run across. Like you never knew when they were going to just suddenly explode and turn into the Thing and turn on you.
That was. I remember that. I didn't play it too much, but I remember thinking that was so cool how you had to be worried about that, just like in the movie.
Yeah.
And I think John Carpenter even voices a character in the game, the director.
Huh.
So it's just something else I remember being neat about it.
I'm going.
I know also at some point we were going to touch on handhelds, but
yeah,
I guess we're running kind of long.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, why don't we touch on handhelds real quick? But if you don't mind, I have two other games I just want to touch on before we go to handhelds.
Oh, yeah,
real
absolutely.
quick. Well, first off, I didn't play it too much, but it's one of the first console, I think it is the first console MMORPG, initially on the Dreamcast, then on the GameCube and Xbox, one of the few GameCube online games, actually, Phantasy Star Online. Did either of you guys play that?
No, but, well, go ahead, Matt.
No, I didn't play it, but we did have it. My brothers did play it a little bit, but it was kind of weird because we actually never played it online. But
well, I never played it, but I know it was really big. I was gonna compare it to World of Warcraft, but it's not even a comparison there. But I do know Phantasy Star. Yeah, was huge.
Well, and the other one I just wanted to bring up, when we were talking about story-based games, some of the ones that came to my mind, I think, Cameron, you brought up Shenmue, and I think we touched on the God of War series, but also another personal favorite of ours. Max, I think you like it too, obviously, but Half-Life 2, that was another big one of this era.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the Source engine, I mean, everything that came with that. Steam, yeah.
That was huge.
Digital distribution service. And there was something I was going to say about... what was the game we just said before?
The God of War series?
Well, yeah, it was that. I only ever played the first one. I remember I really liked it, but...
was it Shenmue? 'Cause I was trying to think of the one you were referencing.
No, the game... Max said something about it. We all said something about it. The game just a minute ago. Phantasy Star.
Yeah.
Phantasy Star Online. Okay.
Yeah, Phantasy Star made me also realize that was the first era where we started getting. I mean, because obviously it was the first era we had consoles that were getting online, and it was the first. It was right from the get go. I mean, you had Dreamcast right at the start already having MMOs on consoles, which had originally been, PC only kind of thing.
And it's funny you mention that, because it not just PC only. This was also the first generation. I think, again, this comes into when the conglomerates really started, kind of establishing themselves in the industry. This is where we had this market convergence where cross-platform games became the norm. You got less and less exclusives starting with this generation. Also because the hardware started getting closer and closer together. But, like Activision, EA, Ubisoft, I mean, you'd always get the game on PC, usually Xbox, PS2, GameCube, and then obviously, as we're going to be talking about handhelds, you get the handheld version as well. And that's also what kind of helped the Dreamcast, right, with the Windows CE being on there, because it would make the game, and obviously the Xbox, it made PC ports real easy.
Yeah. And also another MMO I thought of. Did either of you ever see anything about? 'Cause I doubt you played it, but EverQuest. So remember that was also really huge on PS2.
Well, I know someone.
Final Fantasy 11 also.
I didn't play. Yeah, those are two good examples. And EverQuest, especially EverQuest 2, I believe. If you guys like the Opie and Anthony show, great, hilarious radio show. Anthony's a huge gamer. He was a big fan of Half-Life when it first came out, and huge EverQuest player.
Huh.
So yeah, there's actually, I think, bits of him. He got kicked out of a guild, and he talked about it on air. And there were actually these kids playing the game too, calling in, making fun of him for kicking him out. He goes, but I wasn't supposed to, because they said he wasn't I think they said something to the effect of, he wasn't contributing on the raids. He goes, yeah, but I'm more of the celebrity, I'm kind of bringing the press, the publicity for the guild. I didn't think I have to actually do anything. It's pretty funny.
That's funny. Let's see here.
But yeah, I mean, to kind of go on to handhelds here, I mean, you guys ready to do that? Or
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
cool. Well,
I
think, obviously we've got. Technically, you could include the VMU as on the Dreamcast as a handheld.
Yeah, why not? I mean, you could play little games on it.
Yeah, those things are awesome.
Yeah, really interesting hardware.
Yeah, the Dreamcast was just so ahead of its time. I mean, in terms of the ideas and everything, it just really, just incredible.
Yeah.
And so obviously we had the Game Boy Advance, which sold 81.5 million units. And that includes, by the way, the SP model and the Micro. And remember we talked about before, I think we all loved the SP because of the backlight and kind of the laptop opening, so you didn't scratch the screen. And then, Max, you made a great joke, and I think you're right, though. The Micro is pretty much the hipster Game Boy.
Yeah, pretty much. Cause
had those snappable face plates.
Yeah. And technically it had, at least for the first generation SPs, it technically had a better screen than the SP. But I think the later SPs, they end up taking the screen from the Micro and implementing the technology for it. in there. But yeah, the micro is just very very hipstery, very like eye catching. I did like that one, like Famicom look one, the retro one, but it's sort of like the modern Virtual Boy, where it's just kind of like in between major consoles and stuff, and not advertised that well. So sales weren't that strong, but
I remember the Game Boy Advance the most for how I felt cheated by Nintendo because I got the Game Boy Advance. I was so looking forward to the Game Boy Advance, and of course, like I said, got all the magazines back then. I was like checking out all the cool games. I was so excited for so many things for the Game Boy Advance, and I got it for my birthday, I think. I forget what year that would have been, but so excited to play and everything, and just playing games on it. And then I believe it was 2 or 3 months later, Game Boy Advance SP came out. And I was so mad that I told myself I would never buy another Nintendo handheld, and to this day I have not.
Wow. That's some willpower.
Well, mostly I guess just because I haven't. It's not for that reason anymore. I guess it's more just like.
Well, don't tell us that.
I'm actually gonna get a 3DS after they now announced Metroid Metroid 2 Samus Returns.
Oh yeah,
because I've never played Metroid 2, and that was the main reason. The fact that it was on Game Boy and it was a Game Boy title was the main reason why I wasn't. I like the Game Boy. It's just it's difficult to play, and especially a game as complex as Metroid. So to have them recreate it and done the right way, I'm really excited for it. I actually pre-ordered the game. I don't even have a 3DS yet, so my brother does. But so it's whatchamacallit, it's I'm gonna get one for that, but it's gonna be weird because
it's a system seller for you.
Yeah, pretty much because that's the fact that Nintendo is going to be giving us both a 3D and a 2D Metroid game that just blew my mind at E3, so but
yeah. Well, real quick, going back to the SP, although I felt swindled by Nintendo, I have played an SP. One of my friends actually let me borrow one, and then I've played it, various other places. And in my opinion, that is the best Game Boy iteration. Game Boy specifically. I mean, obviously the DS is a whole different beast, but I think that's the best Game Boy iteration. I mean, it had a great backlight, great color screen, had that laptop foldability like we talked about earlier. The buttons were really clicky and satisfying. It is a great handheld, and I would like to own one someday.
And I was just going to say, too, before we continue here, because I know we're going to wrap up soon. I know we're doing these covering whole generations, but I think eventually, and hopefully the fans will agree, we should probably revisit these, but one console at a time, because there's just so much to go through.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good idea, actually.
Yeah, then maybe only branch out when we're talking about like some aspect, like earlier when I was talking about Resident Evil. Yeah, like earlier when I was talking about Resident Evil Outbreak, in addition to other online games that I played, like at my grandma's house, stuff like that. But yeah,
because I was just thinking too, because I mean we've got the Neo Geo Pocket Color, we got the Pokemon Mini, which was kind of like a Neopets kind of thing. We've got the infamous Nokia N-Gage, the Tapwave Zodiac GP32. I'm like, how are we going to go through all this?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that's the one. It's a rabbit hole. You think you covered everything, and it's just more and more to, sort of like me doing the research with Mega Race, just like figuring out, what its history was like with Drive Fractals and stuff, and just like, yeah, and you end up like just video games and video game history in general is just like, again, it's a vortex of confusion because it just keeps on growing and growing. So.
Oh yeah, and sometimes too, you think it's over, but then, like for instance, this generation, look how this is when emulation really started getting big. I mean, like when people modded their Xboxes to play, Genesis games, you could play like Super Mario 64, you could play on an Xbox. I mean, the handhelds were essentially emulators. There's just so much to go through.
I remember when I was a kid, like 13 or more like 16 or something. So it'd be like 2005 or whatever, and I remember I was in a public library, and I remember some kid was playing like Sonic Advance on a Game Boy emulator. He installed a Game Boy Advance emulator on one of the computers at the library, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's a Game Boy. What the So I remember that, and I remember my first time messing around with emulators. I was MAME. I love MAME, and I was like, I want to play Pac-Man. So I went ahead and somehow acquired through means I'm not going to discuss, but I got the Pac-Man and I played it, and I forgot that arcade games go through a diagnostic test when you start up the game, and so I was already really, because of the stigma of emulators in general, just like, oh my god, I've downloaded an emulator, So I was already freaking out about that, and then when I actually, loaded the ROM into the emulator, and then Pac-Man started popping up with all this gibberish, I thought I like installed a virus or something, So I was freaking out, So, but I forgot that was just the power on test.
MAME helps you discover stuff too. I mean, like one of my buddies found a way to get a Virtual Cop 3, the arcade game, running on an Xbox. We had to upgrade the RAM, because I worked with him on it, to 128 megabytes to get it to run. But you could actually get Virtual Cop 3 running on MAME on an original Xbox. You could discover games that way. Like, I had never played Captain Commando before, which was essentially the reason why Capcom's Capcom. You had... there's just so many cool things you could do, especially with the Xbox. And, like I said, we could do a whole thing on that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. No, I remember, and also the MAME's so important for preservation, too, because you get to play a lot of games that you normally wouldn't be able to play because the games are so rare, or, in some instances, like, only available in collections, because they're that rare. One of my favorites is the very first fully polygonal 3D game ever made, Atari's iRobot, which is actually a pretty fun game. I rather like it, and that's on MAME and stuff. And if you ever get a chance, I recommend you play that. It's a fun abstract platformer. But
we could do a whole episode on just emulators.
We could do an episode too. You're talking about games being rare because they're hard to find sometimes because they were unreleased or controversial. I mean, Propeller Arena was supposed to come out on the Dreamcast right after 9/11, but that eventually leaked in 2006. Obviously, you have the Manhunt games, GTA and Postal from this era. I mean, just a lot of cool stuff. Or like with funny, I mentioned Propeller Arena because we were talking about Half-Life earlier. Half-Life on the Dreamcast technically didn't come out, but that's another one that leaked. So that, those are two games right there. I mean, there's just so much we could talk about.
Yeah, no, it's.
But I mean, we really do have to wrap up. I mean, let's just think of what time it is.
Yeah, let's go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, it's almost 2:00 here. So.
Oh wow. I was thinking it's bad by me at 11 and for Cameron. So sorry, Max. Really for you.
It's okay. So no, it's awesome.
But it just shows, I mean, how much material we have. I mean, this is just fantastic. I think this is our best yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, why don't we just, let's run through our plugs and we can say goodbye.
All right.
So first off, obviously, this is the Zoom Platform Podcast. You can visit us to buy remastered PC games at zoom-platform.com. That, again, is zoom-platform.com. If you want to send us questions, suggestions for topics, or anything you want to send us, hopefully a compliment too, please email us at podcast@zoom-platform.com. Again, that's podcast@zoom-platform.com. And Cameron and Max, if you guys want to give, I know, Cameron, you got your blog. Max, you got your music website. Tell the folks about those.
Yeah, Max, go ahead.
So if you want to go ahead and check out some of my music, I have two websites. I have the SoundCloud and Bandcamp. So it'll be cinemax.bandcamp.com and soundcloud.com/DJ Cinemax. And Cinemax is spelled SYNAMAX. And I'm going to be releasing an album soon. I have all the tracks ready and stuff. I just have to actually take time to make sure it's all mastered and everything. But hope to have a lot of new content up soon for you guys, and I really appreciate it if you guys take a listen.
And for me, I've been running a retro gaming blog for 7 years now. It's birthday is coming up. I think. Let's see, what is it? Next week. Yeah, actually 1 week from now, it's birthday coming up. And that's iplayoldgames.wordpress.com. And I don't post as much as I used to, but I have been trying to do more videos recently, and right now I'm doing a Let's Play sort of retrospective on Tail Concerto, which is a old obscure PlayStation 1 game that I enjoyed. And I'm hoping to do more videos like that, so check it out.
Well, congrats, Max, on the album. Looking forward to it. Happy early birthday, Cameron. And thank you, everybody, for listening out there. We hope to bring you much, much more.
See ya.
Bye.
See ya.